the rejected bride who found her home. She traveled 2,000 miles to meet her future husband, only to have him take one look at her face and walk away without a word. Elena Cruz sat alone on that cold wooden bench, her wedding dress still packed in her suitcase, watching her dreams die in a frontier train station. But what she didn't know was that rejection would lead her to something far greater than the marriage she'd lost. It would lead her to the family she was always meant to find. If you want to follow Elena's journey to the very end, please hit that like button and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. Now, let us begin. The evening train had departed Elk Creek Station nearly 2 hours ago, and still Elena Cruz sat motionless on the weathered wooden bench, her single leather suitcase pressed against her ankles like the only friend she had left in the world. The October wind carried the scent of dried sage and approaching winter, slipping through the gaps in her thin wool coat with fingers cold enough to make her shiver. But Elena barely noticed. The chill inside her chest had frozen everything else into numbness. She had traveled 18 days to reach this place. 18 days of rattling train cars, of sleeping upright against windows smeared with dust and condensation, of counting the miles between her old life and the promise of a new one. 18 days of hope pressed against her ribs like a second heartbeat. And it had taken Marcus Webb exactly 37 seconds to destroy all of it. She could still see his face, the way his expression had shifted when he first laid eyes on her on the platform. The eager anticipation dissolving into something harder, something colder. His gaze had traveled from her dark hair to her sun-weathered skin to the modest curves of her figure, and she had watched his lips press together in a thin line of disappointment. "You're not what I expected," he had said. Those 5 words, that was all he had offered her after 3 months of correspondence. After the letters he had written describing his successful mercantile business, his comfortable home, his longing for a wife to share his life. After the promises he had made about partnership and companionship and building something together. "The agency said you were prettier," he continued, his voice dropping low enough that the station master wouldn't overhear. "They said you were refined, Eastern educated." "I am educated," Elena had managed, her voice steadier than her trembling hands. "I taught school for 3 years in Philadelphia before—" "You're Mexican." The word landed between them like a stone dropped into still water. "My father was from Spain," Elena said quietly. "My mother was born in Boston. I am American, Mr. Webb, as American as you." But Marcus Webb had already made his decision. She could see it in the way he stepped backward, creating distance between them as if her heritage were something contagious, as if the olive tone of her skin and the darkness of her eyes had somehow betrayed him. "I'll pay for your return ticket," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. "The morning train leaves at 7. I suggest you be on it." He had pressed 3 folded bills into her hand, not enough for the full journey back, she would later realize, but enough to get her started, enough to ease whatever remnant of conscience he still possessed. And then he had walked away. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of the life she had left behind to answer his advertisement, or the family she had disappointed by choosing adventure over security, or the teaching position she had resigned from because she believed, foolishly, desperately believed, that love might be waiting for her at the end of a westward railroad. The station master had offered her a cup of water and a pitying look, neither of which she wanted. The few other passengers had pretended not to notice the woman sitting alone, with tears tracking silently down her cheeks. And as the sun sank below the mountain ridge to the west, Elena Cruz had come to understand what it truly meant to be abandoned. She had nowhere to go. The money Marcus had given her wasn't enough for a ticket back to Philadelphia. Even if it were, what waited for her there? Her teaching position had been filled. Her small rented room had been given to someone else. Her sister had made it clear that choosing to become a mail-order bride was a scandal the family would not forgive. Elena had burned every bridge to reach this place, and now she sat in the ashes of her own foolish hope. The station house behind her had grown quiet as evening settled over the town. Through the window, she could see the warm glow of kerosene lamps being lit in the small cluster of buildings that made up Elk Creek's main street. A general store, a saloon, a hotel that she couldn't afford, a church with its white steeple catching the last of the daylight. Everyone else had somewhere to belong. Everyone else had a door that would open for them. a fire waiting to warm their bones, a voice that would welcome them home. Elena had a suitcase and a broken promise and the creeping certainty that she had made the worst mistake of her 24 years. She pressed her fingers against her eyes, forcing back the tears that threatened to return. Crying wouldn't change anything. Crying wouldn't buy her a ticket or find her a place to sleep or undo the damage of Marcus Webb's rejection. All crying would do was prove him right, prove that she was exactly the sort of fragile, helpless creature who had no business trying to build a life on the frontier. "Why are you sitting by yourself?" The voice was small and curious, carrying the particular directness of childhood that hadn't yet learned to soften its edges. Elena lowered her hands and found herself looking at a girl of perhaps 7 or 8 years old, with wheat blonde hair escaping from 2 uneven braids and eyes the color of summer sky. The child stood at the edge of the platform, her head tilted slightly to one side like a sparrow examining something interesting. Her dress was clean but faded, the hem showing signs of recent lengthening, and her boots were scuffed in the way that suggested frequent running and climbing. "I'm waiting," Elena said, which was true enough. She was waiting for morning, waiting for the train that would take her somewhere, anywhere. She hadn't worked out the details yet. Waiting for what? For the train tomorrow. The girl's brow furrowed. "But tomorrow is a whole night away. Where are you going to sleep?" It was such a simple question, delivered with such guileless concern, that Elena felt something crack inside her chest. Not a painful crack, more like ice breaking apart on a river in spring, releasing something that had been trapped beneath the surface. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "You don't have a place to stay?" "No." The child processed this information with the serious expression of someone working through a difficult arithmetic problem. Then she stepped closer, close enough that Elena could see the small constellation of freckles scattered across her nose. "I'm Maggie," she announced. "Maggie Hale. My pa and me live at the Hale Ranch, which is about 4 miles that way." She pointed west toward the mountains. "We have a whole house with extra rooms that nobody uses anymore. You could stay with us." Despite everything, the exhaustion, the humiliation, the crushing weight of uncertainty, Elena felt her lips curve into something approaching a smile. "That's very kind of you, Maggie, but I don't think your father would appreciate you inviting strangers to stay in his home. Pa says we should always help people who need helping. He says that's what Mama would have wanted." Maggie's voice softened on the word Mama, just slightly, just enough to reveal the shape of something precious and lost. "Your mother? She died when I was 5. It's just me and Pa now, and sometimes Martha. She's our neighbor who comes to help with cooking and cleaning, but she says she's getting too old to keep doing it, and Pa needs to find a proper solution." Maggie wrinkled her nose. "I don't know what a proper solution is, but Pa always looks tired when Martha says it." Elena studied the child before her. This small, earnest creature who spoke of loss with the matter-of-fact acceptance of someone who had already learned that the world did not always arrange itself according to happiness. There was something familiar in that acceptance, something that resonated with the hollow place inside Elena's own chest. "My name is Elena," she said. "Elena Cruz." "That's a pretty name. Is it Spanish?" "Yes, my father was from Spain." "I've never met anyone from Spain before. Is it far away?" "Very far, across a whole ocean." Maggie's eyes widened with wonder. "Pa says the ocean is so big you can't see the other side. Is that true?" "It's true. I've seen it myself. The water stretches all the way to the edge of the sky, and when you look out at it, you feel very small and very amazed at the same time." "I want to see it someday," Maggie declared. "I want to see lots of things. Pa says maybe when I'm older we can travel somewhere, but right now there's too much work to do on the ranch and not enough hands to do it." "What kind of ranch?" "Cattle, mostly. We have about 200 head, which Pa says isn't as many as some folks have, but it's enough to keep us going. And we have chickens, 12 of them, and 2 horses named Duke and Biscuit, and a barn cat who doesn't have a name because she won't come when you call her anyway." Maggie paused for breath. "Do you like animals?" "I do. I grew up in a city, so I didn't have many chances to be around them, but I always wished I could." "Cities don't have animals." "They have some, horses and dogs mostly, but not cows or chickens or barn cats." That sounds lonely, Maggie said thoughtfully. How do you get eggs without chickens? Elena found herself laughing, a small, surprised sound that seemed to startle both of them. She couldn't remember the last time she had laughed. Certainly not in the past 18 days of anxious travel. Maybe not in the months before that when she had been teaching arithmetic to distracted children and dreaming of something more. You buy them from people who do have chickens, she explained, or from shops that buy them from farmers. That seems like a lot of extra steps. It is, but that's how cities work. Everything comes from somewhere else, and everyone depends on everyone else to bring it. Maggie considered this with the same serious expression she had worn earlier. I think I like the ranch better. At least you know where your eggs come from. That does seem simpler. Maggie! The voice came from behind Elena, deep and roughened by exhaustion. She turned to see a man striding across the platform toward them, tall and broad-shouldered, with the weathered tan of someone who spent his days under open sky. His hat was pulled low against the evening chill, but she could see the strong line of his jaw and the dark hair curling against his collar. He moved with the slightly stiff gait of someone whose muscles ached from hard labor, but there was nothing slow about the way his gaze swept across the scene before him. His daughter standing close to a strange woman, the suitcase at Elena's feet, the empty bench in the gathering dusk. Maggie, I told you to stay by the wagon. But Pa, this lady needs help. She doesn't have anywhere to sleep tonight and she's waiting for a train that doesn't come until tomorrow, and I thought maybe, Maggie. His voice was gentle but firm, the voice of a father who had learned to set boundaries without crushing the spirit that required them. We've talked about this. You can't just invite people home without asking. I know, but I apologize, Elena said quickly, rising to her feet. Your daughter was just being kind. I didn't mean to. What are you doing here alone? The question was direct but not unkind. Elena met his eyes for the first time. Gray, she noticed, like storm clouds over winter hills, and saw something there that surprised her. Not suspicion or judgment, but genuine concern. I was supposed to be met by someone, she said carefully. A man I had been corresponding with. But there was a misunderstanding. He's made other arrangements. It was a polite way of describing what had happened. A civilized summary that avoided the uglier truth of Marcus Webb's prejudice and her own devastating rejection. The man's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. A mail-order bride situation? Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks despite the cool evening air. Yes. And he left you here, just like that? He provided some money for a return ticket. I'm to leave on the morning train. To go where? The simple question cut through all of Elena's careful composure. Where was she going? Back to Philadelphia, where no one wanted her? To some other city where she knew no one and had nothing? Into a future that had suddenly become a blank and terrifying void? I haven't decided yet, she managed. Pa, Maggie tugged at her father's sleeve. She taught school, she's educated, and she's nice. Maggie, and she likes animals, even though she grew up in a city that doesn't have any. And her name is Elena, which is Spanish, and she's seen the ocean. Despite the awkwardness of the situation, Elena felt a flicker of warmth at the child's earnest advocacy. Whatever came next, at least one person in this godforsaken town had decided she was worth defending. The man looked at his daughter with an expression that shifted between exasperation and something softer. Then he looked at Elena, and she could see him taking in the details of her appearance. The travel-worn coat, the neatly mended gloves, the determined set of her shoulders despite the obvious exhaustion in her eyes. Caleb Hale, he said, extending his hand in the way of frontier men everywhere. I run the ranch my daughter mentioned, about 4 miles west of here. Elena shook his hand, noting the calluses that spoke of hard work and the firmness that spoke of a man who knew his own strength. Elena Cruz. I taught school in Philadelphia until recently. Until you decided to answer an advertisement and travel across the country to marry a stranger. There was no judgment in his voice, only a kind of tired recognition, as if he understood something about desperate choices and the hope that drove people to make them. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Most things do. He released her hand and took a breath, his gaze drifting to the horizon where the last of the daylight was fading into purple dusk. Look, Miss Cruz, I can't in good conscience leave you sitting here all night, The station house closes in an hour, and the hotel, well, let's just say it's not the kind of place a woman alone should be staying. I'll manage? With what? $3 in a suitcase? He must have seen the surprise on her face because he shook his head slightly. I know how much the return tickets cost, and I know the kind of men who pull stunts like this. They always give just enough to ease their conscience, never enough to actually solve the problem they created. Elena felt a flare of something unexpected, not quite anger, but something close to it. She had been managing her own life for years. She had supported herself through teaching, had made her own decisions, had chosen to take this risk with her eyes open. The fact that it had turned out badly didn't make her helpless. But she also wasn't stupid. She could recognize when she was out of options. What are you suggesting, Mr. Hale? Come back to the ranch tonight. We have spare rooms, like Maggie said. You can have a hot meal and a bed that's not a train station bench. Tomorrow, we can figure out your next steps. I don't take charity. I'm not offering charity. I'm offering hospitality. There's a difference. He glanced at his daughter, who was watching the exchange with obvious hope. And if it makes you feel better, you can earn your keep. Maggie's been needing help with her schoolwork, and I've been too busy with the ranch to give her the attention she deserves. An evening of tutoring would more than cover a night's stay. It was a face-saving offer, and Elena recognized it as such. He was giving her a way to accept help without sacrificing her pride, a kindness that felt as unexpected as it was welcome. One night, she said carefully. One night, he agreed. And if you decide tomorrow that you'd rather take your chances at the hotel or on the first train out, that's your choice. No obligations either way. Maggie let out a small squeal of excitement and grabbed Elena's hand. You'll love the ranch. And Biscuit, she's the friendlier horse. She likes to eat apples right out of your hand if you hold them flat like this. She demonstrated with her palm. And the chickens are funny in the morning, all running around like they're late for something important. Caleb Hale reached down and picked up Elena's suitcase before she could protest. Wagons around the side. It's not a fancy ride, but it'll get us home before full dark. As Elena allowed herself to be led away from the bench where she had spent the most miserable hours of her life, she felt something shift inside her chest. Not hope, exactly. She wasn't ready to feel hope again, not after having it so thoroughly crushed, but perhaps something adjacent to hope, a small, tentative possibility that the worst moment of her life might not be the end of her story. The wagon ride to this Hale ranch took nearly an hour over rutted roads that made Elena's teeth rattle. Maggie chattered the entire way, filling the evening air with stories about the ranch, the animals, the neighboring families, and approximately 100 other topics that seemed to spring from her mind in an endless, joyful stream. Caleb drove in relative silence, occasionally answering his daughter's questions or pointing out landmarks in the darkening landscape. A creek where he had learned to fish as a boy, a ridge where you could see 3 counties on a clear day, a cluster of aspens that turned gold every autumn like coins scattered across the hillside. Elena listened and watched and tried to make sense of the strange turn her life had taken. This morning, she had woken on a train with a future stretching before her, marriage, a home, a place in the world. Now she was riding through unfamiliar territory with people she had just met, headed toward an uncertain tomorrow that had no shape or form. The ranch house emerged from the darkness like a promise, a sturdy 2-story structure with lamplight glowing in the downstairs windows. It wasn't elegant, but it was solid, built from timber that had weathered decades of mountain winters, and the hands of people who understood that shelter was something you earned from the land. Home, Maggie announced as the wagon rolled to a stop. Isn't it beautiful? Elena looked at the house with its wraparound porch and stone chimney, at the barn looming behind it, and the corral where 2 horses stood watching their arrival with patient curiosity. It wasn't anything like the refined row houses of Philadelphia, or even the comfortable mercantile home Marcus Webb had described in his letters. But there was something about it, something warm and welcoming and real, that made her throat tighten unexpectedly. "It's lovely," she said, and meant it. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and dried herbs, and the lingering traces of an earlier meal. The furnishings were simple but well-crafted. A heavy oak table, chairs with worn cushions, shelves lined with books and practical items, and the small treasures of daily life. And everywhere, Elena noticed, there were signs of a woman's absence. a vase sitting empty on the windowsill, a rocking chair positioned by the fire that no one seemed to use, a shelf of fabric and thread that looked untouched, the dust of months accumulated on the spools. This had been a home with a mother in it once. Now it was a home that remembered her in every corner. "I'll warm up some supper," Caleb said, hanging his hat by the door. "It's just stew from yesterday, but there's plenty of it." "Can I show Elena my room first?" Maggie was already tugging at her hand. "And the guest room where she'll sleep? And my drawings?" "Let the woman catch her breath, Maggie." It's all right," Elena said quietly. "I'd like to see." The tour that followed was conducted with the breathless enthusiasm that only children possess. Elena saw Maggie's small bedroom with its narrow bed and collection of rocks arranged on the windowsill. Each one is from somewhere special. She saw the guest room at the end of the hall, modest but clean, with a quilt on the bed that looked handmade and a window that faced east toward the mountains. She saw the drawings that Maggie had mentioned, pages and pages of them, pinned to the walls of her room or stacked in careful piles on her desk, horses and flowers and the ranch house itself rendered with the unpolished sincerity of a child's hand. "This one is my favorite," Maggie said, pulling a drawing from the bottom of a stack. It showed 3 figures standing in front of the house, a tall man, a small girl, and a woman with long hair and a gentle smile. "That's Mama. I draw her sometimes so I don't forget what she looked like." Elena felt her heart clench at the simple, devastating honesty of those words. This child, who couldn't be more than 7 or 8, had already learned that memory required effort. That love, once lost, had to be actively preserved. "She's beautiful," Elena said softly. "She was. Pa says I have her eyes." Maggie studied the drawing for a moment, then carefully returned it to its place. "Do you have a mama?" "I did. She passed away when I was about your age." "Then you understand." It wasn't a question, it was a statement of recognition, one survivor to another, across the distance of years and experience that separated them. Elena looked at this child who had already learned too much about loss, and felt something inside her shift, a door opening to a room she hadn't known existed. "I do," she said. "I understand completely." Supper was simple but satisfying. Beef stew thick with potatoes and carrots, fresh bread that Caleb admitted had been baked by the neighbor woman Martha, and coffee strong enough to chase away the last of the evening's chill. They ate at the heavy oak table, Maggie dominating the conversation with questions about Philadelphia and schools, and whether Elena had ever seen snow fall in a city. "It turns gray almost immediately," Elena told her, which Maggie found deeply unsatisfying. Caleb listened more than he spoke, but Elena caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. Not with suspicion, exactly, but with the careful attention of a man who had learned to assess people quickly and accurately. She wondered what he saw, a woman defeated by circumstance or someone still capable of fighting. "Maggie tells me you taught school," he said eventually, during a rare pause in his daughter's monologue. "For 3 years. Arithmetic and reading, mostly, to children between 6 and 12. Did you like it?" Elena considered the question carefully. "I liked helping them learn. I liked watching their faces when something suddenly made sense. When all the pieces came together and they understood something they hadn't understood before. But," she hesitated. "But I always felt like I was preparing them for someone else's life. Teaching them the skills they would need to fit into a world that someone else had designed. Does that make sense?" Caleb nodded slowly. "More than you might think. I felt the same way about law school." "You went to law school?" "For 2 years. Back east, before my father died, and I had to come back to take over the ranch." He shrugged, the gesture carrying years of adjusted expectations. "Sometimes life has different plans than the ones we make." "And you're content? With the ranch, I mean?" "Content enough. It's hard work and the money's tight, and some years the weather tries to kill everything you've built." He glanced at Maggie, who had finally succumbed to exhaustion and was fighting to keep her eyes open. "But it's honest, and it's mine, and it gives her a place to grow up that's better than most." There was no self-pity in his voice, only the pragmatic acceptance of a man who had made peace with his circumstances. Elena found herself respecting that, perhaps more than she would have respected bitterness or complaint. "I should get this one to bed," Caleb said, rising from the table. "The guest room is ready whenever you are. There should be everything you need." "Thank you for all of this. I know it's—" "Don't." His voice was gentle but firm. "You needed help. We had help to give. That's how things work out here, Miss Cruz. We take care of each other because there's nobody else to do it." He lifted Maggie into his arms, the child already half asleep against his shoulder, and carried her toward the stairs. At the bottom step, he paused. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "that man who left you at the station is a fool. Whatever he was looking for, he missed something valuable standing right in front of him." Before Elena could respond, he was gone, his footsteps fading up the stairs with the soft weight of his sleeping daughter. She sat alone at the table for a long time after that, watching the fire burn down to embers and trying to understand what she was feeling. Not grief, exactly, though the shadow of Marcus Webb's rejection still lingered at the edges of her thoughts. Not quite hope, though something in this house and these people had kindled a small, uncertain flame in her chest. Maybe it was simply the relief of being seen, of having someone look at her circumstances and respond with kindness instead of judgment, of being treated as the person deserving of help, rather than a problem to be solved or avoided. When Elena finally climbed the stairs to the guest room, she found that someone, Caleb she assumed, had left a basin of warm water and a clean towel on the dresser. The lamp was already lit, casting soft shadows across the handmade quilt. She unpacked her suitcase slowly, hanging her few dresses in the narrow wardrobe and arranging her personal items on the dresser. At the bottom of the case, wrapped in tissue paper, was the wedding dress she had brought with her, simple white cotton with lace at the collar, purchased with 3 months' savings and all the hope she had possessed. Elena held it for a moment, feeling the weight of everything it represented, the dreams she had carried west, the future she had imagined, the woman she had planned to become. Then she folded it carefully and placed it in the bottom drawer of the dresser, beneath the extra blankets stored there. She wasn't ready to throw it away, but she didn't need to look at it either. Not tonight. Not while the wound was still so fresh. The bed was softer than anything she had slept on since leaving Philadelphia, and the quilt smelled faintly of lavender and sunshine. Through the window, she could see the mountains rising black against a sky scattered with more stars than she had ever seen in her life. Tomorrow, she would figure out what came next. Tomorrow, she would make decisions about trains and tickets and futures yet unwritten. But tonight, for the first time in 18 days, Elena Cruz slept without dreaming of the life she had left behind. Barats. Morning came with the crow of a rooster and the distant lowing of cattle, sounds so foreign to Elena's city-trained ears that she woke confused, momentarily unable to remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back. The rejection, the station, the child with wheat blonde braids and sky-blue eyes who had changed everything with a simple question. She dressed quickly in her most practical traveling dress and made her way downstairs to find the kitchen already warm and occupied. Caleb stood at the stove, managing a cast-iron skillet with the competence of someone who had learned to cook by necessity rather than choice. The smell of bacon and eggs filled the air. "Good morning," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Sleep all right?" "Better than I have in weeks, thank you." "Coffee's on the table. Maggie's already out in the chicken coop. She takes her egg-collecting duties very seriously." Elena poured herself a cup and settled into one of the chairs, watching as Caleb moved through the familiar rhythm of breakfast preparation. In the morning light, she could see him more clearly than she had the night before. The strong line of his jaw, the slight gray at his temples, the web of small lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting against sun and wind. He wasn't handsome in the polished way of Eastern gentlemen, but there was something compelling about him, something solid and real and dependable. "I've been thinking," she said carefully, "about what happens next." Caleb transferred eggs and bacon onto 2 plates and brought them to the table. "And?" "The money I have isn't enough for a full ticket back east. Even if it were—" She hesitated. "There's nothing waiting for me there. My position has been filled. My family has made their feelings clear. Going back would mean starting over with nothing. No references, no connections, no prospects." So what are you considering? It was a reasonable question, asked without pressure or expectation. Elena appreciated that. She appreciated being treated as capable of making her own decisions, even when those decisions felt impossible. I don't know yet. There might be other towns nearby that need teachers, or perhaps domestic work. I'm not too proud to cook and clean if it means keeping a roof over my head. She met his eyes directly. I won't be a burden to anyone, Mr. Hale. Whatever happens, I intend to earn my own way. Before Caleb could respond, the back door burst open and Maggie tumbled in, her cheeks flushed with cold and excitement. She was carrying a basket of eggs with exaggerated care, as if they were made of gold. 6 eggs this morning. That's 2 more than yesterday, and the gray hen finally started laying again. Pa, she's been holding out on us for weeks. Set them on the counter, Magpie, gently. I know. She completed her task with ceremonial solemnity, then turned to Elena with a grin. Did you sleep good? Was the bed comfortable? Are you going to stay for breakfast? Can you help me with my arithmetic after? The barrage of questions was delivered at approximately twice the speed of normal speech. Elena found herself smiling despite the weight of her uncertain future. Yes to all of those, she said. And good morning to you too, Maggie. Good morning! The child slid into her chair and attacked her breakfast with enthusiasm. Pa, Elena taught school in a real city. She probably knows all kinds of things. Could she help me with my lessons while she's here? That's up to Miss Cruz. I'd be happy to, Elena said. I promised you tutoring last night in exchange for hospitality. I always keep my promises. After breakfast, Elena found herself settled at the kitchen table with Maggie and a slate board, working through arithmetic problems while Caleb headed out to check on the cattle. The child was bright and eager, grasping concepts quickly once they were explained clearly, but it was obvious that her education had suffered from inconsistency. Mrs. Patterson comes twice a week when she can, Maggie explained, but sometimes the weather's bad, or her back hurts, or she has to help her own grandchildren, and Pa tries to help, but he's so tired at night that the numbers all blur together. Have you thought about going to school in town? Maggie's face fell. Pa says it's too far to go every day, and he can't spare anyone to drive me. Besides, the town kids... She trailed off, suddenly fascinated by the slate in front of her. The town kids what? They say things. About Pa. About how Mama died. About how we live all the way out here like we're hiding from something. Elena felt a flare of protective anger on behalf of this child who had already lost so much. What do they say about how your mother died? Just things. That she was sick in her head. That she did something bad. That Pa... Maggie's voice dropped to a whisper. That Pa couldn't stop her. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Elena didn't ask for clarification. She didn't need to. Some tragedies carried their own explanations in the spaces between words. People say unkind things when they don't understand something, Elena said carefully. It doesn't make those things true. I know. Pa told me that too. He said Mama was sick in a way that doctors couldn't fix, and that she didn't mean to leave us, and that it wasn't anybody's fault. Maggie looked up, her blue eyes fierce with unshed tears. I believe him, but it still hurts when people say things. Of course it does. Words can hurt even when we know they're wrong. Did people say unkind things to you about coming west to get married? Elena thought of her sister's cold pronouncement, of the whispered conversations among her fellow teachers, of Marcus Webb's dismissive assessment of her worth based on the color of her skin. Yes, she said simply. They did. What did you do? I came anyway. I decided that their words mattered less than what I wanted for my life. Maggie considered this with the gravity of a child working through something important. But it didn't turn out the way you wanted. No, it didn't. Elena reached out and covered Maggie's small hand with her own. But that doesn't mean I was wrong to try. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is take a chance, even when we don't know how it will end. Like when Mama married Pa? She came from far away too, from somewhere in Missouri. Pa says she took a chance on him when nobody thought she should. Your mother sounds like a brave woman. She was. Maggie's voice was soft but certain. She was the bravest person I ever knew. Pa says I'm like her. I think your pa is right. They returned to their arithmetic after that, but something had shifted between them. A door had opened, an understanding had formed, and Elena found herself thinking, not for the first time, that this child with her fierce heart and her unguarded honesty might be the most remarkable person she had ever met. By midday, Elena had made a decision. She found Caleb in the barn, mending a harness with the patient concentration of someone who had learned that repair was always cheaper than replacement. He looked up as she approached, setting aside his work. "Everything all right? Maggie's not giving you too much trouble?" "Maggie is wonderful. That's actually what I wanted to talk to you about." Caleb's expression grew guarded, the walls of a cautious man rising behind his eyes. "I'm listening." "You need help. You said it yourself last night. Not enough hands for all the work, and the neighbor woman getting too old to keep coming. Maggie needs consistent teaching that you don't have time to provide. The house needs—" She hesitated, knowing she was treading on delicate ground. "The house needs attention that only someone living in it full-time can give." "And you're offering to be that someone?" "I'm offering to work. Room and board in exchange for keeping house, helping with whatever ranch work I can manage, and tutoring Maggie properly." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm not looking for charity, Mr. Hale. I'm looking for a fair arrangement that benefits both of us. You don't know anything about ranch life. I can learn. I'm a fast learner, and I'm not afraid of hard work. The nearest town is an hour away. The winters here are brutal. Some weeks you wouldn't see another soul besides me and Maggie. I've been lonely in crowds of thousands, Mr. Hale. I don't think isolation is what I need to worry about." Caleb was silent for a long moment, his gray eyes searching her face for something she couldn't name. Whatever he found there seemed to satisfy him, because some of the tension left his shoulders. "This is a working arrangement," he said finally. "Nothing more. I want that understood clearly." "Of course. And if either of us decides it's not working, no hard feelings. We part ways like adults." "Agreed. And for heaven's sake, stop calling me Mr. Hale. I feel old enough already without that." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "It's Caleb. Just Caleb." Elena felt something loosen in her chest, something that had been wound tight since the moment Marcus Webb walked away. "Then you should call me Elena." They shook hands again, as they had at the train station, but this time the gesture carried different weight. This wasn't the formality of strangers meeting. This was the beginning of something else, something uncertain but real, fragile but full of possibility. "I should warn you," Caleb said, releasing her hand. "Maggie is going to be over the moon. She's been asking for a woman in the house since, well, for a long time. I'm not her mother. I know that. She knows that too, somewhere in that busy head of hers. But she's 7 years old and she misses having someone to braid her hair and teach her things and just be here, in ways I can't be, no matter how hard I try." The vulnerability in his voice caught Elena off guard. This was not a man accustomed to admitting what he couldn't do. That he trusted her with this truth felt like an honor she hadn't earned. "I'll do my best," she said quietly. "That's all I can promise. That's all any of us can do." He returned to his harness work, and Elena walked back toward the house with the strange, unfamiliar sensation of having found solid ground beneath her feet. Not the ground she had expected, not the life she had planned, but something real, something she could build on. When she told Maggie the news, the child let out a shriek of joy that probably startled the chickens in the next county. "You're staying? You're really staying? For how long? Forever?" "For as long as it makes sense for everyone," Elena said carefully. "That means forever." Maggie threw her arms around Elena's waist in a hug tight enough to squeeze the breath from her lungs. "I knew it. I knew you were supposed to come here. I just knew it." Elena held this fierce, hopeful child and let herself feel something she hadn't felt since stepping off the train in Elk Creek, the warmth of being wanted. Not for what she could provide or what she represented, but simply for who she was, simply for being here. It wasn't the future she had imagined when she boarded that train in Philadelphia. It was something else entirely. And standing in that simple ranch house kitchen, with a child's arms wrapped around her and the afternoon sun streaming through the windows, Elena Cruz allowed herself to wonder if it might somehow be enough. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity that left Elena exhausted but strangely satisfied. She helped Maggie organize her scattered schoolwork into neat piles. She explored the kitchen and pantry, taking mental inventory of supplies and making notes about what needed to be purchased or preserved. She walked the perimeter of the house and outbuildings with Caleb, learning the layout of the property and the rhythm of daily chores. By evening, she had blisters forming on her hands from unfamiliar work and a head full of information she was still trying to process. But when she sat down to supper with Caleb and Maggie, she felt something she hadn't expected to feel. She felt like she might belong here. "Elena's going to make apple pie tomorrow," Maggie announced through a mouthful of stew. "She said she knows how because her mama taught her when she was little." "I said I would try," Elena corrected gently. "It's been years since I made one. I can't promise it will be any good. I'm sure it will be wonderful." Maggie's confidence was absolute. "You're good at everything." That's quite an endorsement after one day. "I'm an excellent judge of character. Pa says so." Caleb shook his head, but Elena caught the warmth in his eyes. "I said you were stubborn. That's not the same thing. Stubborn people make good judges of character. We don't change our minds easily, so when we decide something, it's because we really mean it." It was the kind of childhood logic that couldn't be argued with, so Elena didn't try. She simply smiled and finished her supper and listened as Maggie explained her plans for the next day, the next week, the entire rest of their lives together. Later, after Maggie had been tucked into bed and the dishes had been washed and put away, Elena found herself alone with Caleb on the front porch. The night was cold but clear, the stars scattered across the sky like someone had spilled a jar of diamonds on black velvet. "She likes you," Caleb said quietly. "I haven't seen her this happy since—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "She's easy to like," Elena said. "She's bright and curious and kind. You've raised her well." "Her mother gets the credit for the first 5 years. I've just been trying not to mess it up since then." "You're doing more than that. She adores you." Caleb was quiet for a moment, his gaze fixed on the distant mountains. "She told you, didn't she? About Sarah? About how she died?" "She mentioned that there were rumors in town." "Rumors." The word came out bitter. "That's a polite way to describe it. The truth is Sarah was sick for a long time. Depression, the doctor called it. A darkness that would come and go like weather, except we could never predict it. Some days she was the woman I married, bright and funny and so full of life it hurt to look at her. Other days—" He stopped, and Elena saw his jaw tighten against whatever memory was trying to surface. "You don't have to tell me." "I know, but you're living in this house now. You should understand what happened here." He took a breath. 2 years ago, on a day that seemed like any other day, Sarah walked out to the creek behind the property. I was in the far pasture. Maggie was napping. Nobody saw her go. Nobody had any reason to think. Elena felt her heart constrict with the weight of what he wasn't saying. "I found her 3 hours later. By then, it was too late." His voice was steady, but she could hear the effort it cost him. "The town decided I should have known, should have watched her more carefully, should have locked up the means. As if you can anticipate something like that, as if love is supposed to come with perfect foresight." "I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate, but she meant them more than she had ever meant anything. "I'm so sorry, Caleb." The worst part is Maggie. She was too young to understand what really happened, and I've tried to protect her from the ugliest details. But the other children, their parents talk. Word gets around. He finally looked at her, and she saw the grief that he had learned to carry but never set down. She lost her mother. Then she lost her chance at a normal childhood, and there's nothing I can do to give either of those back to her. You can love her. You can be there for her. You can show her that people don't leave just because things get hard. Is that enough? I don't know. Elena spoke honestly, because this man deserved honesty. But I think it's more than most children have. I think it's something worth building on. They stood in silence for a while after that, two people bound by losses they hadn't chosen and circumstances they hadn't planned. The night wrapped around them like a blanket, cold but not unkind. "Thank you," Caleb said finally, "for staying, for giving this a chance. I know it's not what you expected when you came west." "No, it's not." Elena thought of Marcus Webb and his 37 seconds of judgment. She thought of the train station bench and the despair that had threatened to swallow her whole. She thought of a child with sky-blue eyes who had seen a stranger in need and responded with simple, fearless kindness. "But maybe," she said slowly, "it's what I needed." Caleb nodded, as if that made perfect sense to him, as if he understood something about the strange workings of fate that brought people together in unexpected ways. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow we start teaching you how to survive a Montana winter. You're going to need all the rest you can get." Elena smiled and turned toward the door, then paused. "Caleb?" "Yeah?" "I'm glad Maggie found me at that train station." His expression softened into something she couldn't quite name. "So am I, Elena. So am I." She went to bed that night with the sound of the wind in the pines and the distant call of an owl somewhere in the darkness. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new lessons, new moments of doubt and discovery. Tomorrow she would begin the long, slow process of building a life she had never imagined. But tonight, she slept peacefully in a room that was beginning to feel like hers, in a house that was beginning to feel like home. The first frost came 3 weeks after Elena arrived at the Hale Ranch, coating the world in a delicate layer of white that made everything look new and unfamiliar. She woke before dawn to find ice crystals forming patterns on her window, intricate designs that caught the first light of morning like fragments of a dream she couldn't quite remember. In the kitchen below, she could already hear Caleb moving around, the familiar sounds of coffee being made and the wood stove being stoked. It had become their unspoken routine. He would start the fire and the coffee. She would handle breakfast. And by the time Maggie came stumbling down the stairs with her hair tangled from sleep, the house would be warm and filled with the smell of food. Elena dressed quickly and made her way downstairs, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the lingering chill. Caleb looked up from the stove as she entered, and something in his expression made her pause. "First real cold of the season," he said. "It'll get worse before it gets better. I grew up in Philadelphia. I know cold. You know city cold. This is different." He handed her a cup of coffee, the warmth of the ceramic a small comfort against her chilled fingers. "City cold is inconvenient. Out here, cold can kill you if you're not careful." "Then I'll be careful." He studied her for a moment, as if weighing her words against some internal measure. Whatever conclusion he reached, he kept it to himself. "I need to ride out to the north pasture today. Some of the fence posts came down in that wind last week, and if I don't fix them before the snow hits, we'll lose cattle." "How long will you be gone?" "Most of the day, probably. Maybe longer if the damage is worse than I thought." Elena felt a flutter of anxiety at the prospect of being alone with Maggie for so many hours. Not because she doubted her ability to care for the child. 3 weeks had proven that they worked well together. But because the weight of responsibility felt heavier when Caleb wasn't nearby. He was the anchor of this place, the one who knew how everything worked and what to do when things went wrong. "We'll be fine," she said, pushing the worry aside. "Maggie and I have plenty to keep us busy." "I know you will." He finished his coffee and set the cup by the sink. "There's wood stacked by the back door. Keep the fires going, both the kitchen stove and the one in the main room. If anything happens, there's a rifle in the cabinet by the front door. You know how to use one?" "No." "I'll teach you when I get back. For now, if you see anything that worries you, a strange rider, a wild animal, anything, you get Maggie and you lock yourselves in the cellar. It's got a bolt from the inside and enough supplies to last a few days." The seriousness of his tone sent a chill down Elena's spine that had nothing to do with the weather. This wasn't the world she had known in Philadelphia, where dangers were mostly human and help was always within shouting distance. This was the frontier where nature itself could be an enemy and isolation was both blessing and curse. "I understand," she said quietly. Caleb nodded, satisfied with her response. "I'll be back before dark if I can. If I'm not—" He hesitated, then continued. "If I'm not back by full dark, don't wait up. Sometimes the work takes longer than expected. But I'll always come home. That's a promise." There was something in the way he said it, "always come home," that made Elena's breath catch. She wondered how many times he had made that same promise to Sarah. She wondered if there had been a night when he didn't come home in time, when the darkness arrived before he did and everything fell apart. But she didn't ask. Some questions were too heavy to carry. Caleb left just as the sun was clearing the mountain ridge, his figure growing smaller against the vast landscape until he disappeared over a rise and was gone. Elena stood on the porch watching until she couldn't see him anymore, then turned back to the house and the responsibilities waiting inside. Maggie was awake by then, sitting at the kitchen table with her slate and a piece of chalk, practicing the letters Elena had assigned her the day before. Her tongue stuck out slightly as she concentrated, a habit that made her look even younger than her 7 years. Where did Pa go? To fix some fences in the north pasture. He'll be back tonight. The north pasture is far. Maggie looked up, her blue eyes carrying a shadow of worry that seemed too old for her face. What if something happens? Nothing is going to happen. Your father knows this land better than anyone. He's done this hundreds of times before. But what if it does? What if his horse throws him, or a bear comes, or he gets lost in the snow? Elena crossed to the table and knelt beside Maggie's chair, taking the child's small hands in her own. Listen to me. Your father is strong and smart and careful. He promised he would come home, and I believe him. Do you believe him? Maggie nodded slowly. Pa always keeps his promises. Then we have nothing to worry about, do we? The fear didn't completely leave Maggie's eyes, but it retreated to a manageable distance. This child had already learned that sometimes people didn't come home, that promises could be broken by circumstances beyond anyone's control. That knowledge couldn't be unlearned, only balanced against hope. Can we make something special for when he gets back? Maggie asked. Something to warm him up after being out in the cold all day? What did you have in mind? Mama used to make this soup. It had potatoes and onions and some kind of meat. I don't remember exactly, but it was always hot and it always made Pa smile. Elena felt the familiar ache that came whenever Maggie mentioned her mother, a mixture of tenderness and sorrow, weighted with the responsibility of honoring a woman she had never known. We could try to make something similar, she said carefully. I may not get it exactly right, but we can experiment. That's what Mama used to say. She said cooking was just science with better smells. Elena laughed, surprised by the observation. That's a lovely way to put it. Your mother sounds like she was very wise. She was. Maggie's voice carried the fierce certainty of a child defending someone precious. She was the smartest person I ever knew, except maybe Pa. And now you. The casual inclusion made Elena's heart stumble. This child, who had every reason to guard her affections carefully, was opening doors that had been closed for years. The trust implicit in that simple statement felt like both a gift and a burden. I'm honored you think so, Elena said softly. Now, shall we see what ingredients we have for this soup? The morning passed quickly, filled with the comforting rhythms of domestic work. They peeled potatoes and chopped onions, Elena's eyes watering from the sharp smell, while Maggie giggled at her expressions. They sorted through the pantry and discussed what could be added to make the soup heartier. A bit of dried beef, some carrots from the root cellar, herbs that hung in fragrant bundles from the kitchen rafters. As they worked, Maggie talked. She talked about school and the arithmetic problems she still struggled with, and the book of fairy tales that Elena had been reading to her at bedtime. She talked about the chickens and which ones were her favorites, and how she had named them after flowers, even though Pa said they shouldn't name animals they might have to eat someday. I told him I'd never eat Daisy or Rose or Buttercup, Maggie said solemnly. He said that was impractical. I said love is always impractical, and he didn't have an answer for that. Elena smiled at the child's logic. Where did you learn that? About love being impractical? Mama told me once. She said the most important things in life don't make sense on paper. Love and hope and kindness, they can't be measured or calculated, but they're what make everything else worth doing. The words settled into Elena's chest like seeds finding fertile ground. She thought of her own choices, leaving Philadelphia, answering Marcus Webb's advertisement, staying at the Hale Ranch when every practical consideration told her to move on. None of it made sense on paper. But standing here, in this warm kitchen with this remarkable child, it felt more right than anything she had done in years. Your mother was definitely wise, Elena said, and I think she raised a daughter who will be even wiser. Maggie beamed at the compliment, then returned her attention to the carrot she was attempting to peel. Do you think Pa will like the soup? I think he'll love it, because you helped make it, and because we'll eat it together. That's what makes food special. Not just the ingredients, but the people you share it with. That's what Mama said too. Maggie looked up, her expression suddenly serious. Elena, do you think Mama can see us? From wherever she is now? The question caught Elena off guard. She had been raised with faith, but the specific doctrines of her childhood had faded over the years, replaced by a vaguer sense of something beyond the visible world. She didn't want to lie to Maggie, but she also didn't want to take away the comfort that belief could provide. I think, she said carefully, that love doesn't disappear just because someone isn't here anymore. I think the people we love leave pieces of themselves in us, in our memories, in the things they taught us, in the way we see the world because they were part of it. So maybe your mother can see you, or maybe she lives on in a different way. Either way, she's still with you. Maggie considered this for a long moment. I like that. It means she's not really gone, just different. Exactly. Different, but not gone. They finished preparing the soup and set it to simmer on the stove, filling the kitchen with rich, savory warmth. Elena moved on to other tasks, sweeping floors, mending a torn hem on one of Maggie's dresses, organizing the bookshelf in the main room that had become cluttered with newspapers and almanacs. Throughout the day, she found herself glancing out the windows, watching the sky for changes that might signal trouble. The morning's frost had melted under a pale sun, but clouds were building in the west, heavy and gray with the promise of snow. She thought of Caleb out there in the open country, working alone against the elements, and felt a knot of worry tighten in her stomach. It's going to snow, Maggie announced around midday, pressing her nose against the window pane. I can smell it. You can smell snow? It has a smell, kind of like metal and clean water and cold all mixed together. Mama taught me how to recognize it. Elena joined her at the window, looking out at the darkening sky. The clouds had swallowed the sun now, casting everything in a flat gray light that made the world look like a photograph rather than a living place. How much do you think will fall? Maggie shrugged. Sometimes it's just a dusting. Sometimes it's enough to bury the house. You never know until it starts. As if responding to her words, the first flakes began to drift down from the sky, small and sparse at first, almost hesitant, then growing thicker and more determined. Within an hour, the ground was covered in a thin white blanket, and the air had taken on a muffled quality that made every sound seem both close and distant at the same time. Elena kept the fires burning high and tried not to check the window every 5 minutes. The soup bubbled quietly on the stove. Maggie worked on her letters with unusual concentration. The afternoon stretched on, heavy with waiting and the soft percussion of snowflakes against glass. He'll be home soon, Maggie said suddenly, as if reading Elena's thoughts. Pa always knows when a storm is coming. He'll have started back by now. Of course he will. But the hours continued to pass, and the snow continued to fall, and the windows darkened from gray to deep blue to black. Elena lit the lamps and served Maggie supper and tried to keep her voice steady as she read aloud from the book of fairy tales. She told herself that Caleb had said he might be late, that he knew this land, that he had survived countless winters before she arrived. She told herself everything she needed to hear. But when the clock struck 8 and then 9 and then 10, and still there was no sound of hooves in the yard, no creak of the front door opening, no familiar voice calling out that he was home, Elena felt fear wrap around her heart like a cold hand squeezing. Maggie, sweetheart, it's time for bed. I want to wait for Pa. He might be very late. You know how the work can be. I'm not tired. But even as she said it, Maggie's eyes were drooping, her small body fighting against exhaustion. What if he comes home and I'm asleep? Then I'll wake you, I promise. Maggie looked at Elena for a long moment, searching her face for something. Reassurance, perhaps, or the truth she was too young to demand but old enough to suspect. Whatever she found there seemed to satisfy her because she nodded slowly and allowed herself to be led upstairs. Elena helped her change into her nightgown and braided her hair and tucked the quilts around her small frame. She sat on the edge of the bed and told her a story, not from the book, but from her own memory, something her mother had told her when she was young and afraid of the dark. In the morning, Elena said softly, your father will be here at the breakfast table complaining about the cold and asking for extra coffee, and everything will be fine. You'll see. You promise? I promise to do everything I can to make sure that happens. It wasn't the same as promising it would be true, and Maggie was smart enough to notice the difference. But she was also tired enough not to argue. Her eyes closed, her breathing deepened, and within minutes she was asleep. Elena stayed beside her for a while, watching the steady rise and fall of the child's chest and listening to the wind howl outside the window. Then she quietly rose, closed the bedroom door behind her, and went back downstairs to wait. The fire had burned low while she was gone. She added more wood and watched the flames climb higher, casting dancing shadows across the walls. The soup had simmered down to a thick stew, still warm on the back of the stove, still waiting for someone who hadn't come. Elena wrapped herself in a blanket and sat in the chair by the window, peering out into the swirling darkness. The snow had intensified, driven horizontal by a wind that rattled the windows and made the house creak like a living thing. She could see nothing beyond the porch, just white and black and movement, chaos made visible. Where was he? She tried to imagine the possibilities. Maybe he had taken shelter somewhere, waiting out the worst of the storm in a line cabin or a rock overhang. Maybe his horse had gone lame and he was walking the animal home slowly to avoid further injury. Maybe the fence repairs had taken longer than expected and he was still working, his hands numb with cold, his mind focused on getting the job done. Or maybe something had happened. A fall. An injury. A wrong turn in the blinding snow that led him away from the ranch instead of toward it. Stop, Elena told herself firmly. Imagining the worst won't help anyone. But the fear wouldn't listen to reason. It sat in her chest like a stone, growing heavier with each passing hour, fed by every gust of wind and every minute that ticked by without the sound of his return. Around midnight, she heard it. At first, she thought it was just another trick of the wind, a variation in the constant howling that had become the night's background music. But then it came again, clear this time, and Elena realized it was the sound of hooves in the yard. She was out the door before she could think, the cold hitting her like a physical blow, the snow stinging her face and soaking through her dress. She could barely see anything in the darkness, but she could hear movement near the barn, the heavy breathing of a horse, the crunch of boots in snow. Caleb? A figure emerged from the swirling white, leading a horse by the reins. Even through the storm, Elena could see that something was wrong. He was moving slowly, stiffly, one arm pressed against his side in a way that suggested pain. "Get back inside," he called, his voice rough with cold. "I need to see to the horse." "You're hurt." "It's nothing, just a fall. Get inside before you freeze." But Elena was already beside him, reaching for his arm, trying to see his face through the snow. What she saw made her blood run cold. His skin was pale, almost gray, and there was dried blood on his forehead, half hidden by his hat. He was shivering uncontrollably, his whole body trembling with a violence that spoke of deep, dangerous cold. "The horse can wait," she said firmly. "You can't." "Elena, you'll die out here if you don't get warm. The horse is hardy. You need to come inside, now." For a moment, she thought he would argue. Caleb Hale was not a man who accepted help easily, and even less one who let others make decisions for him. But whatever he saw in her face, determination, fear, something stronger than stubbornness, made him relent. "Tie her in the lean-to," he said, handing her the reins. "She'll be sheltered enough until morning." Elena did as he asked, her fingers clumsy with cold as she secured the horse in the small covered area beside the barn. By the time she finished, Caleb had made it to the porch, leaning against the railing like a man fighting to stay upright. She got him inside and shut the door against the storm, the sudden warmth of the house feeling like an embrace after the brutal cold. But Caleb didn't seem to notice. He was still shivering, his teeth chattering, his movements slow and uncoordinated as she helped him out of his snow-covered coat. "The fire," he managed. "Need to get warm." Elena guided him to the chair closest to the hearth, the one where she had been sitting in her vigil. His clothes were soaked through, not just with snow, but with something darker. She looked down and saw that his shirt was stained with blood, the fabric torn along his left side. What happened? Horse spooked at something, went down on a rocky slope. He closed his eyes, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. Couldn't get up for a while. By the time I did, the storm had started. "Let me see." She unbuttoned his shirt with hands that were steadier than she felt. peeling back the wet fabric to reveal the wound beneath. It wasn't as bad as she had feared. A long gash along his ribs, deep enough to bleed heavily, but not deep enough to be life-threatening. The bigger danger was the cold. His skin was icy to the touch, and his shivering had a quality to it that spoke of a body fighting desperately to generate heat. "I'm going to clean this and bandage it," she said. "Then we need to get you out of these wet clothes and into something dry." "Maggie, asleep. She doesn't know anything yet." He nodded, relief flickering across his features. "Good. Don't want her to worry. She worries anyway. She loves you." "I know." His voice was barely a whisper now, his energy fading fast. "I love her too. More than anything." Elena worked quickly, heating water, cleaning the wound, applying a bandage from the supplies she had found in the kitchen cabinet. Caleb bore it all with stoic silence, though she could see the pain in the tightness around his eyes and the way his jaw clenched with each touch. Getting him out of his wet clothes and into dry ones was another challenge entirely. He was too weak to do it himself, but too proud to accept more help than absolutely necessary. In the end, they compromised. Elena turned her back while he struggled out of his sodden trousers and into the dry pants she had brought from his room, then helped him into a clean shirt when his fumbling fingers couldn't manage the buttons. "Thank you," he said when it was done, his voice rough with something more than cold. "You didn't have to—" "Yes, I did." She pulled a quilt from the back of the chair and wrapped it around his shoulders. "Now stop talking and rest. Your body needs all its energy for warming up." He didn't argue. That alone told her how bad he felt. Elena stoked the fire higher and made him drink warm broth from the soup she had kept simmering. She sat beside him as the clock ticked toward morning, watching the color slowly return to his face and the shivering gradually subside. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but inside this small circle of warmth and firelight, they were safe. "I thought you weren't coming back," she said finally, when the silence had stretched long enough to become comfortable. Caleb turned his head to look at her, his gray eyes dark in the flickering light. "I promised I would." "I know, but promises don't always matter to the weather." "No." He was quiet for a moment. "When I went down, when the horse fell and I couldn't get up right away, I thought about Maggie. I thought about leaving her alone the way Sarah did, and I couldn't—" His voice broke. "I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't make her lose another person." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. "She would have survived. She's stronger than you know." "I know how strong she is, but I also know what it cost her to lose her mother. I won't put her through that again, not if there's any way I can prevent it." "You can't control everything, Caleb. Sometimes terrible things happen no matter how hard we try to stop them." "I know that too." He reached out and took her hand, his grip weak but deliberate. "But I also know that tonight, when I was lying in that snow wondering if I was going to freeze to death, I thought about more than just Maggie. I thought about you." Elena's heart stuttered. "Me?" "You've been here less than a month, and already this house feels different. Maggie laughs more. The rooms don't feel so empty, and I—" He stopped, seeming to search for words. "I don't feel so alone anymore. I didn't realize how much weight I was carrying until you helped me carry it." She didn't know what to say. The words he was speaking felt too big for the quiet space they occupied, too heavy with meaning for her to hold. "I'm not asking for anything," he continued. "I know our arrangement was for work, not whatever this is. But I wanted you to know. I wanted you to understand that you matter here, that you matter to me." Elena looked at their joined hands, at the contrast between his calloused fingers and her softer ones. She thought about the life she had imagined when she boarded that train in Philadelphia, the husband she had expected, the home she had dreamed of, the future that had seemed so clear and now seemed like a stranger's story. "I don't know what I'm feeling," she admitted. "Everything has happened so fast. A month ago, I was planning to marry a man I'd never met. Now I'm here, in this place with you and Maggie, and it feels like—" She struggled for the right words. "It feels like I've known you both forever, and that terrifies me." "Why?" "Because the last time I trusted feelings like this, I ended up on a bench at a train station watching everything I believed in fall apart." Caleb nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. "Marcus Webb was a fool." You said that before. It bears repeating. Anyone who couldn't see your worth in the first 5 seconds of meeting you wasn't paying attention. He squeezed her hand gently. But I understand being scared. I understand protecting yourself from hurt. I've been doing it for 2 years. Since Sarah. I told myself I would never feel that way about anyone again. It hurt too much to lose her, and I couldn't risk going through that pain a second time. He paused. But tonight, when I thought I might not make it home, I realized that shutting yourself off from love doesn't protect you from loss. It just means you lose things while you're still alive. The words settled into Elena's chest like stones dropping into still water, sending ripples outward that touched places she had tried to keep hidden. She had been doing the same thing, she realized, building walls, protecting herself, pretending that keeping her distance would keep her safe. But safety was an illusion. She had learned that on a train station bench. The only real choice was whether to spend your life hiding from pain or to embrace the things that made pain possible: connection, hope, love. I'm not ready to call this anything, she said quietly. I'm not ready to make promises or plan futures or pretend I know where this is going. I'm not asking you to. What are you asking for? Caleb held her gaze, and she saw something there that she had never seen directed at her before. Not from Marcus Webb, not from anyone. It was something warm and steady and patient, something that didn't demand or pressure or expect. I'm asking you to stay, he said simply. Not forever, if forever scares you. But for now, for tomorrow, for as long as it feels right. Elena thought of Maggie asleep upstairs, dreaming of a morning when her father would be at the breakfast table. She thought of the soup still warm on the stove, waiting to be shared. She thought of this house that had slowly, imperceptibly become her home. I'll stay, she said, for now. It wasn't a promise of forever. It wasn't a declaration of love. But it was something true, something honest, something that left room for whatever might come next. Caleb smiled, the first real smile she had seen from him, warm enough to chase away the last of the night's cold. For now, he agreed. That's enough. The storm blew itself out sometime before dawn, leaving behind a world transformed by snow. Elena woke in the chair by the fire, stiff and disoriented, to find morning light streaming through windows rimmed with frost. Caleb was asleep in the chair beside her, the quilt still wrapped around his shoulders, his breathing deep and even. She rose quietly and went to the window. The snow lay thick and white across the landscape, smoothing every edge, erasing every flaw, making everything look new and clean and possible. The sky above was brilliant blue, washed clear by the storm, and the air that slipped through the window's seams was sharp and cold and fresh. Behind her, she heard footsteps on the stairs. Elena? Maggie's voice was small, uncertain. Is Pa... Your father is fine. He came home last night during the storm. He's sleeping by the fire. Maggie rushed past her to see for herself, stopping short when she saw Caleb's bandaged side and the exhaustion still visible in his face. For a moment, she just stood there, absorbing the evidence that something had gone wrong. Then she turned back to Elena, her blue eyes bright with tears and relief. You took care of him. We take care of each other. That's how it works here, remember? Maggie nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. That's what Mama used to say. Then your mother was very wise. She was. Maggie looked at her father again, then back at Elena. Are you still going to stay, even after all of this? Elena thought of the conversation in the firelight, of hands held and truth spoken, and a future that had changed shape overnight. She thought of the fear she had felt during those long hours of waiting, and the relief that had flooded through her when Caleb emerged from the storm. She thought of what it meant to choose something, even when you were afraid. Yes, she said, pulling Maggie into a hug. I'm still going to stay. From the chair by the fire, Caleb's voice came rough with sleep, but warm with something deeper. That's the best news I've heard all morning. Maggie broke away from Elena and ran to him, climbing carefully into his lap and wrapping her arms around his neck. Elena watched them, father and daughter, reunited after a night of fear, and felt something shift inside her chest. Something that had been closed was opening. Something that had been cold was warming. It wasn't the future she had planned. It wasn't the life she had expected. But standing in that snow-bright kitchen, watching the two people who had become her unexpected family, Elena Cruz allowed herself to believe that it might be something even better. The days that followed settled into a new rhythm, one shaped by recovery and snowbound intimacy. Caleb's wound healed slowly, keeping him close to the house while his body regained its strength. Elena found herself taking on more responsibilities, not just the housework and Maggie's lessons, but helping with the animals, learning to read the weather, understanding the countless small tasks that kept a ranch functioning. She discovered muscles she hadn't known she possessed, aching in new places each night as she fell into bed exhausted but satisfied. She learned that chickens had personalities as distinct as people, that horses could sense fear and uncertainty, that a well-built fire was as much art as science. And she learned other things too, quieter things, more dangerous things. She learned the way Caleb's eyes crinkled at the corners when he laughed at something Maggie said. She learned the particular rumble of his voice when he read aloud by firelight. She learned how it felt to stand beside him at the window watching the sun set over snow-covered mountains, the silence between them comfortable rather than awkward. She was learning what it meant to belong somewhere, and that knowledge was changing everything. Winter settled over the Hale Ranch like a guest who had decided to stay indefinitely, wrapping the land in layers of white that grew deeper with each passing week. By December, the snow reached past Maggie's knees in places, and the world had shrunk to the boundaries of what could be walked between the house and barn. Elena had never experienced isolation like this. In Philadelphia, even the worst winter storms couldn't stop the city from functioning. There were always neighbors to visit, shops to browse, streets to walk. Here, the nearest town was buried under the same snow that trapped them, and the only faces she saw day after day were Caleb's and Maggie's. She had expected to feel suffocated by it. Instead, she discovered something unexpected: peace. The quietness of snowbound days had a rhythm all its own. Mornings began with the crackle of fires being stoked and the smell of coffee brewing. Afternoons unfolded in lessons with Maggie, in books read aloud, in the simple satisfaction of domestic tasks completed well. Evenings brought the three of them together around the kitchen table, sharing meals and stories and the comfortable silences of people who had learned to exist in the same space without friction. It was during one of these evenings, nearly 2 months after Elena's arrival, that Maggie asked the question that had been hovering unspoken between them all. "Elena, are you going to marry my pa?" The question landed in the middle of supper like a stone dropped into still water. Elena felt heat rise to her cheeks as she glanced at Caleb, whose expression had frozen somewhere between surprise and something harder to read. "Maggie," he said quietly, "that's not an appropriate question." "Why not? Mrs. Patterson says that when a lady lives with a gentleman, they're supposed to get married, otherwise it's improper." She pronounced the last word with careful precision, as if she had been practicing it. "I don't know what improper means exactly, but Mrs. Patterson made it sound bad." Elena set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. She had known this moment would come eventually, had felt it building in the sidelong glances from the few neighbors they'd encountered, in the careful way Caleb introduced her as Miss Cruz, who helps with the house and Maggie's schooling. The frontier might be more forgiving than Eastern society, but it still had its proprieties. Mrs. Patterson was speaking about certain social expectations, Elena said carefully. In some communities, people think it's improper for an unmarried man and woman to live under the same roof. But why? You sleep in the guest room. Pa sleeps in his room. I don't see what's improper about that. It's complicated, sweetheart. Grown-ups always say that when they don't want to explain something. Maggie's blue eyes were fixed on Elena with uncomfortable intensity. "I just want to know if you're going to stay forever. Because if you're not, I'd rather know now." The raw honesty of the statement cut through all the careful dancing around the subject. This child had already learned what it meant to lose someone without warning. She wasn't asking about propriety or social expectations. She was asking whether her heart was safe to hope. Elena looked at Caleb, and something passed between them in that glance. An acknowledgement of the conversation they had been avoiding, the feelings they had been circling around like wary animals approaching water. "Maggie," Caleb said, his voice rough, "what Elena and I have it's complicated. There's that word again. Let me finish. When Elena came here, she was supposed to marry someone else. That didn't work out, and she needed a place to stay. I needed help with you in the house. We made an arrangement that helped us both. But arrangements can change, and people's feelings can change, and sometimes it takes time to figure out what those changes mean. Maggie processed this with the serious expression she always wore when working through difficult arithmetic. So you don't know yet if you love her? The question hung in the air, heavy with implications none of them were prepared to address. Elena felt her heart hammering against her ribs as she waited for Caleb's response. I know, he said slowly, that Elena has become very important to this family. I know that the house feels different with her in it, better, warmer, more like a home than it's felt in a long time. And I know that I care about her happiness in ways that go beyond just our arrangement. That sounds like love to me, Maggie declared. Maybe it is. Maybe it's something else. The point is, these things take time to understand properly. And rushing into decisions about marriage just because other people think we should, that's not the right reason to do anything. Maggie turned her attention back to Elena. What about you? Do you love Pa? Elena felt the weight of the question pressing against her chest. She thought about the night of the storm, about Caleb's hand in hers, about all the small moments that had accumulated over the past 2 months, like snowflakes building into drifts. She thought about the fear she had felt when he didn't come home, and the relief that had washed through her when he finally appeared through the snow. I care about your father very much, she said quietly. And I care about you. But Maggie, love is something that needs to grow at its own pace. It can't be rushed or forced or decided just because someone asks a question at the supper table. So you might love him later, when it's had time to grow? Despite the heaviness of the conversation, Elena felt a smile tugging at her lips. You're very persistent. Pa says that's one of my best qualities. I said it was one of your most exhausting qualities, Caleb corrected, but there was warmth in his voice. There's a difference. The tension in the room had eased slightly, though the questions Maggie had raised still hung in the air like smoke after a fire. They finished supper with lighter conversation, and Maggie was sent upstairs to prepare for bed, with the promise that Elena would come up soon for their nightly reading. When they were alone, Caleb spoke first. I'm sorry about that. She heard something from Mrs. Patterson, and it's been brewing ever since. Don't apologize. She asked honest questions. They deserved honest answers. Were they honest? The answers you gave? Elena looked at him across the table, at this man who had offered her shelter when she had nothing, who had trusted her with his daughter and his home, who had held her hand in the firelight and asked for nothing except that she stay. They were as honest as I know how to be right now, she said. Everything is still so new, Caleb. 3 months ago, I was preparing to marry a complete stranger. 2 months ago, I was sitting on a train station bench thinking my life was over. And now, she gestured at the room around them. Now I'm here, and it feels more like home than anywhere I've ever been, and I don't know what to do with that feeling. What do you want to do with it? I want to stop being afraid. The admission came out before she could stop it. I want to believe that this is real, that it won't disappear the moment I let myself trust it completely. But I've been disappointed before. I've had my hopes destroyed before, and part of me is still waiting for the other shoe to drop. Caleb rose from his chair and came around the table, stopping in front of her. He reached out and tilted her chin up so she was looking at him. I can't promise you that nothing will ever go wrong, he said quietly. Life doesn't work that way. But I can promise you this. I'm not Marcus Webb. I don't make promises I don't intend to keep, and I don't abandon people when they become inconvenient. Whatever happens between us, whether it turns into something more or stays exactly what it is now, I will never leave you without a home. You have my word on that. Elena felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sensation of being seen, of being valued, of being promised something real in a world that had offered her so many empty words. That's not nothing, she managed. It's not nothing, he agreed. It's everything I have to give right now. Is it enough? She thought about the question, turning it over in her mind like a stone worn smooth by water. Enough was a complicated word. Enough for what? Enough to stay? She was already staying. Enough to be happy. Happiness wasn't something you could quantify or guarantee, enough to try, to open herself up to possibility, to let the walls around her heart crack and crumble. "It's enough," she said finally. "For now." He smiled, and it transformed his face in a way that still surprised her every time, softening the hard lines, warming the gray of his eyes. "For now" seems to be our phrase. It's a good phrase. It doesn't make promises it can't keep. No, it just leaves room for whatever comes next. Whatever comes next. The words hung between them, full of possibility and uncertainty in equal measure. Elena didn't know what the future held, didn't know if these feelings would deepen into love or settle into something quieter and just as valuable. But for the first time since Marcus Webb walked away from her on that train platform, she felt ready to find out. The winter deepened, and with it came a rhythm that felt increasingly like permanence. Elena taught Maggie her letters and numbers, watched her quick mind grasp concepts that had taken other students weeks to understand. She cooked meals that grew more confident each day. Learning the particular tastes of this household, Caleb's preference for strong coffee, Maggie's love of anything sweet, the way they both came alive when presented with warm bread fresh from the oven. And slowly, so gradually, she almost didn't notice it happening, the walls around her heart began to come down. It happened in small moments, a brush of fingers when passing a dish at supper, a shared laugh over one of Maggie's observations, a quiet evening by the fire when Elena looked up from her mending to find Caleb watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. It happened in bigger moments, too. The afternoon when a fever struck Maggie, and Elena sat by her bedside for 18 hours, bathing her forehead with cool cloths and whispering stories until the child's temperature finally broke. The night when a wolf howled too close to the house, and Caleb stood watch with his rifle while Elena held Maggie and promised that nothing would hurt her. These were the moments that built a family, not the grand gestures of courtship or the formal declarations of intention, but the ordinary acts of care and protection that accumulated day by day until they formed something unbreakable. By the time February arrived, Elena had stopped thinking of herself as a temporary guest. The guest room had become her room, filled with her few possessions arranged exactly as she liked them. The kitchen had become her domain, its rhythms as familiar as her own heartbeat. And Maggie, precious, fierce, unforgettable Maggie, had claimed a piece of her heart that Elena knew would never be returned. It was during one of these February days when the snow was beginning to show the first hints of thaw that their fragile peace was shattered. The knock came in the middle of the afternoon when Caleb was out checking on the cattle and Elena was helping Maggie with a geography lesson. It was such an unusual sound. They had had no visitors in weeks that for a moment Elena just stared at the door, uncertain if she had imagined it. Then it came again, louder this time, more insistent. "Stay here," Elena told Maggie, rising from the table. "I'll see who it is." She crossed to the door and opened it, expecting one of the distant neighbors who occasionally made the journey through the snow. What she found instead made her blood run cold. Marcus Webb stood on the porch. He looked different from the man who had rejected her at the train station 4 months ago. Thinner, somehow, with dark circles under his eyes and a nervous energy that seemed at odds with the cold disdain she remembered. He was dressed for town rather than the wilderness, his fine wool coat already showing patches of moisture from the melting snow. "Miss Cruz?" His voice was exactly as she remembered, polished on the surface, hollow underneath. "You're a difficult woman to find." Elena's hand tightened on the door frame. "What are you doing here?" "Looking for you, obviously. When you didn't board the return train, I assumed you had found alternative arrangements. It took some effort to trace those arrangements to this location." "Why would you trace anything? You made your position perfectly clear at the station." "Yes, well." He shifted his weight, something flickering in his expression that she couldn't quite read. "Circumstances have changed." Behind her, Elena heard Maggie's voice, small and uncertain. "Elena? Who is it?" She glanced back at the child, then returned her attention to the man on the porch. "Mr. Webb, whatever business you think you have here, you're mistaken. I suggest you return to town before the weather turns." "I'm afraid I can't do that." He took a step forward, and Elena instinctively moved to block the doorway. "We have a matter to discuss, a contractual matter." There was no contract between us, only correspondence, which you terminated quite definitively. That's where you're wrong. He reached into his coat and withdrew a folded piece of paper. The marriage broker who arranged our correspondence. Do you remember signing papers with her, an agreement regarding the terms of our arrangement? Elena felt ice form in her stomach. She did remember signing something, a standard form she had thought, merely confirming her participation in the mail-order bride program. She had barely glanced at the fine print, too eager to begin her new life to worry about legal details. What about it? According to the terms of that agreement, you were obligated to marry whomever the broker matched you with within 60 days of arrival, or else repay all transportation costs plus a substantial fee for breach of contract. His smile was thin and cold. The 60 days have long since passed, Miss Cruz, and the broker has assigned her claim against you to me. The words didn't make sense at first. Elena's mind scrambled to understand what he was saying, to find the flaw in his logic. You rejected me. You told me to leave. How can you possibly claim breach of contract when you're the one who broke it? I have witnesses who will testify that you refused to honor our arrangement, that you found the conditions of frontier life unsuitable and chose to remain at the station rather than accompany me to my home. His smile widened. It's your word against mine, Miss Cruz, and I am a prominent businessman in this territory while you are, well, a woman of uncertain circumstances living under the protection of a widower. Elena felt the blood drain from her face as she understood what he was really saying. It wasn't about the contract. It wasn't about money or legal claims or any of the things he was pretending. It was about power, about control, about punishing her for some slight she couldn't even identify. What do you want? What I've always wanted, a wife. He stepped closer again, and this time Elena didn't retreat. My business has suffered, you see. Apparently the good people of Elk Creek have some concerns about a man who orders a bride and sends her away. My customers have become sparse. My credit has become tight. A reconciliation with you would solve many problems. You can't be serious. I am entirely serious. You can come with me now, willingly, and we can tell everyone it was simply a misunderstanding that took time to resolve. Or I can pursue the breach of contract claim and ruin whatever reputation you have left. His eyes traveled past her, into the house where Maggie was surely listening. I imagine Mr. Hale would be quite interested to learn that his housekeeper is the subject of legal action. Scandal like that tends to spread, doesn't it? Elena felt rage building in her chest, hot and clean and clarifying. This man, this small, petty, vindictive man, thought he could threaten her into submission, thought he could use fear and shame to force her into a marriage she had never wanted. Get off this property. I don't think you understand. I understand perfectly. You're a coward and a bully, and you think you can control me because you have money and I don't. But you're wrong, Mr. Webb. I would rather face every consequence you can imagine than spend one day as your wife. For a moment, genuine surprise flickered across his face. Then his expression hardened into something ugly. You'll regret that decision. Perhaps, but not as much as I would regret the alternative. She slammed the door in his face. For several seconds, Elena just stood there, her back pressed against the wood, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She heard footsteps on the porch, Webb pacing, perhaps considering whether to force the issue, and then, mercifully, the sound of him retreating. Elena? Maggie's voice was barely a whisper. Who was that man? Elena turned to find the child standing in the middle of the kitchen, her face pale with fear. She had heard everything, Elena realized, every word of the ugly confrontation. No one important, Elena said, crossing to her and kneeling so they were eye to eye. Just someone from my past who wanted something I couldn't give him. He sounded angry. He sounded like he wanted to hurt you. He can't hurt me. Not really, not as long as I don't let him. But what if he comes back? What if he brings the sheriff or a judge or... Then we'll deal with it. Together. Your father and you and me. Elena took Maggie's small hands in her own. Whatever happens, I'm not going anywhere. Do you understand? I made you a promise, and I intend to keep it. Maggie's lower lip trembled, but she nodded. I don't want you to go. I know, sweetheart. I don't want to go either. When Caleb returned an hour later, He found them sitting at the kitchen table together, Maggie working on her letters with unusual concentration, while Elena stared at the door with an expression he had never seen before. What happened? Elena told him everything. Marcus Webb's appearance, his threats, the breach of contract claim that seemed designed specifically to trap her. She watched Caleb's face as she spoke, watched the way his jaw tightened and his eyes grew cold. "He came here," Caleb said when she finished, "to my home, and threatened you. He threatened to ruin my reputation, to pursue legal action, to spread scandal that would affect everyone in this house. Let him try." The words came out flat and hard. "I know every lawyer in this territory, and half the judges too. Webb's claim wouldn't survive 5 minutes of scrutiny by anyone competent enough to read the actual terms of that agreement. But the scandal? What scandal? The scandal of a woman who was abandoned by a shallow man and found refuge with a family that needed her?" Caleb shook his head. "People already talk, Elena. They've been talking since you arrived. Anyone who matters already knows the truth, and anyone who chooses Webb's version over reality isn't worth worrying about." "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is." He crossed to where she sat and took her hands, just as she had taken Maggie's. "I spent 2 years letting the whispers about Sarah's death define how I lived. 2 years hiding out here because I couldn't face the judgment of people who didn't understand what we went through. And you know what I learned? The opinions of small people only have power if you give it to them." "But your business, the ranch is fine. Our neighbors are decent people who judge us by our actions, not by gossip. And if a few townspeople want to cluck their tongues, let them. They were doing that anyway." Elena felt tears threatening again, a different kind of tears this time. Not from fear or despair, but from the overwhelming sensation of being defended, of having someone stand between her and harm without hesitation. "Why are you doing this?" "Because you're part of this family now." His voice was rough with emotion. "Because Maggie loves you, and I care about you more than I've let myself care about anyone in a very long time. And because Marcus Webb made a mistake when he thought he could threaten someone under my protection." The word protection landed differently than it might have months ago, not as charity or obligation, but as something deeper, something that went both ways. What do we do now? Now we prepare. If Webb decides to pursue his ridiculous claim, we'll need documentation, your original correspondence, any witnesses to what happened at the station, records of your time here. And we'll need a lawyer who can shut this down before it goes any further. Do you know someone? For the first time since he'd walked in the door, Caleb smiled. I know exactly someone. An old friend from my law school days who moved out here a few years back. He owes me several favors, and he happens to specialize in contract disputes. Elena felt a fragile hope kindle in her chest. You think we can fight this? I think Marcus Webb vastly overestimates his own cleverness and underestimates ours. But more importantly, he squeezed her hands. I think he made a mistake coming here, because whatever happens next, he's reminded us both that what we have is worth protecting. What we have. The words hung in the air between them, full of meaning that neither of them was quite ready to name. But Elena felt the truth of them in her bones. She had come to Montana expecting a business arrangement and found something far more precious. A home. A family. A place where she belonged, and she would be damned if she let Marcus Webb take any of it away. The days that followed were filled with a different kind of tension than the quiet intimacy of their snowbound winter. Caleb sent word to his lawyer friend in the territory's capital, and letters began flying back and forth with strategies and advice and demands for documentation. Elena found herself reliving those last days in Philadelphia, tracking down the address of the marriage broker who had arranged her correspondence with Webb. She wrote careful letters explaining her side of the story, requesting copies of the original agreement, asking whether other women had faced similar claims. The responses that came back were illuminating. Apparently, Marcus Webb had a reputation among the mail-order bride agencies, a reputation for finding fault with the women who arrived and then using contract technicalities to extract money or other concessions. At least 3 other women had settled with him rather than face the embarrassment of public legal action. He's a predator, Elena said, reading the latest letter from the broker's office. He chooses vulnerable women and uses the system against them. Not anymore, Caleb said grimly. His lawyer contacted mine yesterday. When confronted with the evidence we'd gathered, the testimonies from other women, the documentation of his pattern of behavior, Webb suddenly decided the contract claim wasn't worth pursuing. It's over? It's over. He's withdrawn his claim and agreed to a statement acknowledging that you fulfilled your obligations and the dissolution of the arrangement was mutual. Elena felt the tension that had been coiling in her chest for weeks suddenly release. She sat down hard in the nearest chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the relief. I was so afraid, she admitted. Not just of losing, but of what it might mean for you and Maggie. I couldn't bear the thought that my past could damage your future. Caleb knelt beside her chair, taking her hands again in what had become a familiar gesture. Your past isn't something to be ashamed of. You took a chance on a better life, and when that chance turned sour, you adapted, you survived, you built something new. He paused. Those aren't weaknesses, Elena. Those are strengths. I don't always feel strong. Neither do I. But that's what family is for. We're strong for each other when we can't be strong for ourselves. Family. There it was again. That word that meant so much more than she had ever expected it to. Elena looked at this man who had defended her without hesitation, who had used his connections and his resources to protect her from harm, who had never once suggested that she was more trouble than she was worth. Caleb, she said quietly, there's something I need to tell you. He waited, his gray eyes steady on hers. That night during the storm, when you asked me if what you were offering was enough, I said it was enough for now. And that was true then. She took a breath, gathering her courage. But I think I need to change my answer. Change it how? I don't want for now anymore. I don't want uncertainty or waiting or keeping my feelings safely at arm's length. She felt tears building again, but these were different. Tears of hope rather than fear. I want this to be real, Caleb. I want this to be permanent. I want to be part of this family in every way that matters. For a long moment, he didn't respond. Elena felt her heart contracting with each second of silence, wondering if she had miscalculated, if she had revealed too much too soon. Then Caleb reached up and cradled her face in his hands with a gentleness that made her breath catch. Elena Cruz, he said softly, I have been waiting months to hear you say that. When he kissed her, it was nothing like she had imagined. Not the passionate collision of romantic novels, nor the perfunctory gesture of social obligation. It was something gentler and deeper, a promise made in the language of touch, a vow sealed without words. When they finally pulled apart, Elena was laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by the enormity of what had just changed between them. Pa, are you kissing Elena? They turned to find Maggie standing in the doorway, her expression caught somewhere between shock and delight. I am, Caleb admitted. Is that all right with you? It's perfect. Maggie ran across the room and threw her arms around both of them, creating a tangle of limbs and laughter. Does this mean she's going to stay forever? Caleb looked at Elena, the question in his eyes. Yes, Elena said, pulling Maggie closer. It means I'm going to stay forever. Spring arrived slowly that year, melting the snow in stages that transformed the landscape from white to brown to the first tentative green. Elena watched the world come back to life through the kitchen window each morning, marveling at how different everything looked without its blanket of winter. The ranch itself seemed to awaken from hibernation. Caleb spent long days repairing fences and checking on cattle that had weathered the cold months in the far pastures. The chickens began laying more abundantly, and Maggie's daily egg collection grew from a handful to a basket full. Even the barn cat, who had spent most of winter curled by the fire, ventured out to hunt in the warming meadows. But for Elena, the most significant change was internal. The kiss she had shared with Caleb had shifted something fundamental in their relationship, transforming the careful dance of unspoken feelings into something acknowledged and real. They hadn't discussed the future in concrete terms yet. There had been no formal proposal, no setting of dates, but the understanding between them was clear. This was no longer an arrangement. This was the beginning of a life together. She found herself noticing things about Caleb that she had tried not to notice before. The way his shoulders moved when he swung an axe, the sound of his laugh when Maggie said something unexpectedly wise, the particular intensity of his gaze when he watched Elena across the room, as if he couldn't quite believe she was really there. For his part, Caleb had become more openly affectionate, though never in ways that might confuse Maggie or move faster than Elena was comfortable with. A hand on the small of her back as they passed in the kitchen. A brief kiss on her forehead before he headed out for the day's work. Small gestures that accumulated into something larger, something that felt like coming home every single day. It was during this season of renewal that news came from town that would test everything they had built. The letter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered by a neighbor who had made the journey to Elk Creek for supplies. Elena saw the official seal before she read a word, and her stomach tightened with apprehension. "It's addressed to you," she told Caleb when he came in for the midday meal, "from the territorial courthouse." Caleb took the envelope with a frown, turning it over in his calloused hands. "I'm not expecting anything from them." He opened it at the kitchen table while Elena served the stew she had prepared, and Maggie chattered about the new calf she had discovered in the barn that morning. Elena watched Caleb's expression change as he read, watched the color drain from his face and his jaw set in a hard line. "What is it?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he read the letter again, more slowly this time, as if hoping he had misunderstood the first time through. "Caleb? It's about Sarah." His voice was barely above a whisper. "There's been a petition filed. Someone is claiming that her death wasn't what we said it was." The words hung in the air like smoke, obscuring everything they touched. Elena felt ice form in her stomach. "What do you mean? What are they claiming?" "They're saying I had something to do with it, that Sarah's death wasn't by her own choice, that there should be an investigation." He set the letter down with hands that trembled slightly. "They're accusing me of murder." Maggie had gone silent, her spoon frozen halfway to her mouth. She looked between her father and Elena with eyes that had suddenly grown much too old. "Pa, what does that mean?" Caleb closed his eyes for a moment, and Elena could see him struggling to compose himself. When he opened them again, he reached across the table and took his daughter's hand. "It means that someone is telling lies about what happened to your mother. Someone wants to hurt our family by making people think I did something terrible." He squeezed her fingers gently. "But it's not true, Maggie. You know that, don't you? You know I would never hurt anyone." "I know, Pa." Her voice was small but steady. "You loved Mama. You would never hurt her." "That's right, and we're going to prove that to everyone who needs to hear it." Elena picked up the letter and read it herself, her eyes scanning the legal language for details. The petition had been filed anonymously, citing new evidence that had come to light regarding the circumstances of Sarah Hale's death. The territorial court was ordering a formal inquiry, requiring Caleb to appear before a magistrate in 3 weeks' time. "Who would do this?" Elena asked. "Who has something to gain from accusing you?" "I don't know." But even as he said it, something flickered in Caleb's expression, a shadow of suspicion quickly suppressed. "It doesn't matter. What matters is fighting it, proving that there's no substance to these accusations." "You know who did this?" Elena's voice was quiet but certain. "Tell me." Caleb was silent for a long moment. Then he turned to Maggie. "Sweetheart, why don't you go check on that new calf? Make sure she's nursing properly." "But Pa..." "Please, Maggie. I need to talk to Elena about some grown-up things." Maggie looked like she wanted to argue, but something in her father's face stopped her. She slid down from her chair and headed toward the door, pausing at the threshold. "I don't care what anyone says about you, Pa. I know you're good." Then she was gone, the door closing quietly behind her. Caleb sat in silence for several seconds, his gaze fixed on the table in front of him. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with memories he had clearly hoped never to revisit. "Sarah had a brother, Henry. He never approved of our marriage, thought she was throwing her life away on a rancher with no prospects. When she died, he blamed me. Said I should have seen what was happening, should have gotten her help, should have prevented..." He stopped, his throat working. He said a lot of things in those first months, terrible things. Eventually, he left the territory, and I thought that was the end of it. But now he's back. The letter doesn't say who filed the petition, but there's no one else who would have motive. No one else who holds that kind of grudge. Caleb's hands clenched into fists on the tabletop. He's going to drag our family through hell just to satisfy his need to blame someone for what Sarah did. Elena reached out and covered his fists with her hands, feeling the tension coiled beneath his skin. Then we fight, just like we fought Marcus Webb. We gather evidence, we find witnesses, we prove that these accusations have no merit. This is different. Webb was trying to exploit a contract loophole. He couldn't finish the sentence. This is an attack on your character and your family, which means the stakes are higher, but so is our motivation. Elena's voice was firm. You told me once that I was worth protecting. Did you mean that? Of course. Then you need to understand that it goes both ways. You're worth protecting too, Caleb. This family, what we've built here, is worth protecting, and I refuse to let some grieving, vindictive man destroy it because he can't accept the truth about his sister's illness. Caleb looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression. The despair that had been gathering behind his eyes began to recede, replaced by something harder, something that looked like the beginning of a fight. You're remarkable, he said quietly. Did anyone ever tell you that? I'm stubborn. There's a difference. Maybe they're the same thing. The weeks that followed were some of the most difficult Elena had experienced since arriving at the Hale Ranch. Caleb's lawyer friend came out from the capital to help prepare for the inquiry, and the house that had become her sanctuary transformed into a battlefield of legal documents and strategy sessions. The evidence they gathered painted a clear picture. Sarah Hale had suffered from severe melancholia for years before her death. The town doctor had records of treating her. Neighbors could testify to her periods of withdrawal and despair. The circumstances of her death, while tragic, were consistent with the pattern of her illness rather than any foul play. But evidence alone wouldn't be enough. The inquiry would be public, held in the Elk Creek courthouse with any citizen free to attend. Whatever happened there would become part of the permanent record, not just of Caleb's case, but of Maggie's history. Every ugly detail would be exposed, every whispered rumor either confirmed or denied in the most visible way possible. Are you sure you want to go through with this? Elena asked one evening after Maggie had gone to bed and the lawyer had returned to town. We could try to settle privately, offer Henry something to withdraw the petition. No, Caleb's voice was adamant. I'm done hiding from this. For 2 years, I've let the rumors and the whispers define how I live. I've kept Maggie isolated because I was afraid of what people might say to her. I've avoided town because I couldn't face the looks and the judgment. He shook his head. If we settle, if we pay Henry off to make this go away, the questions will never stop. People will always wonder if I had something to hide. This is our chance to end it, really end it, once and for all. Even if it means exposing everything? Even if it means Maggie hearing things about her mother she's been protected from? Maggie already knows more than we think. Children always do. Caleb's expression softened with sadness. And she deserves the truth. Not the whispered half-truths she picks up from other children, but the real story of what happened to her mother. Maybe then she can finally start to heal. Elena thought of the drawing she had found in Maggie's room months ago, the family portrait with Sarah's smiling face. She thought of all the times Maggie had mentioned her mother in conversation, each reference carrying the weight of questions she had been afraid to ask. You're right, Elena said finally. It's time. The day of the inquiry arrived with the uncertain weather of early spring, clouds gathering and dispersing, sun breaking through in unexpected moments, the air carrying both the chill of departing winter and the warmth of approaching summer. They drove to town in the wagon, all three of them together. Maggie sat between Elena and Caleb, her small body pressed against his side in a gesture of solidarity that made Elena's heart ache. She was too young to fully understand what was about to happen, but she understood enough to know that her father was being accused of something terrible, and that today would determine whether those accusations stuck. The courthouse was already crowded when they arrived. Word had spread through the territory about the inquiry, and curiosity had drawn spectators from miles around. Elena saw faces she recognized from their few trips to town: the general store owner, the blacksmith's wife, Mrs. Patterson with her perpetual expression of judgment. And standing near the front of the courtroom, she saw a man who could only be Henry. He looked nothing like she had expected. Based on Caleb's descriptions, she had imagined someone harsh and cold, with cruelty written plainly on his features. Instead, she saw a man who appeared broken, thin and pale, with the hollowed-out look of someone who had been grieving for too long, and in all the wrong ways. When Henry's eyes met Caleb's across the room, Elena saw something flash between them that wasn't hatred. It was something rawer, something that might have been, in a different life, love. The magistrate called the proceedings to order. Henry's lawyer presented his case first, a narrative built on insinuation and innuendo, suggesting that Caleb had neglected his wife's condition, had failed to seek proper treatment, had perhaps even contributed to her despair through his behavior. The lawyer carefully avoided direct accusations, instead letting implications do the work that facts couldn't support. Elena watched Caleb's face as he listened to the distorted version of his marriage being presented to the room. His expression remained controlled, but she could see the cost of that control in the whiteness of his knuckles and the set of his jaw. Then it was their turn. Caleb's lawyer called witness after witness, the doctor who had treated Sarah, the neighbors who had observed her struggles, the minister who had counseled the couple during her darkest periods. Each testimony painted the same picture: a woman battling an illness that no one fully understood, a husband who had tried everything in his power to help, a tragedy that had been years in the making and that no one could have prevented. And then the lawyer called his final witness. The defense calls Caleb Hale to the stand. The room fell silent as Caleb rose and made his way to the witness chair. Elena felt Maggie's hand slip into hers, squeezing tight. Caleb's lawyer led him through the basic facts first: how he had met Sarah, their courtship and marriage, the early years of happiness before the darkness began to creep in. Caleb spoke quietly but clearly, his voice steady despite the emotion that Elena could see threatening to break through. Then came the harder questions. "Mr. Hale, can you describe your wife's condition in the months leading up to her death?" Caleb was silent for a moment, gathering himself. Sarah had always had periods of sadness. When we first married, they would come and go. A few days of darkness, then she would be herself again. But after Maggie was born, something changed. The dark periods grew longer, deeper. There were times when she couldn't get out of bed for weeks, times when she would cry for hours without being able to explain why. "Did you seek medical help?" "Everything I could find. Doctors, remedies, rest cures. Nothing seemed to make a lasting difference. The darkness would lift for a while, and we would hope that this time it was really gone. Then it would come back, worse than before." "And in the final weeks before her death?" Caleb's voice dropped so low that Elena had to strain to hear him. "She told me she was tired, not the normal tired of being a wife and mother on a working ranch. A deeper tired, a tired that went all the way to her bones. She said she loved Maggie and me more than anything, but that the weight she was carrying had become too heavy. She said she wasn't sure how much longer she could hold on." "What did you do when she told you this?" "I held her. I told her we would fight it together, the way we had always fought it. I told her she wasn't alone." His voice cracked. But she was alone. In the place where the darkness lived, she was always alone. That's the thing about an illness like hers. No matter how much you love someone, you can't follow them into that darkness. You can only stand at the edge and wait for them to come back. "And on the day she died?" "I was in the north pasture. Maggie was napping. Sarah told me she was going to walk down to the creek. She always said the sound of the water helped quiet her mind." Caleb closed his eyes. "When I came back, I found her note on the kitchen table. By the time I reached the creek, it was too late." "A note." The lawyer turned to address the room. "For the record, the defense has entered into evidence the note left by Sarah Hale on the day of her death. It makes clear her intention and her state of mind. It also makes clear that she held no one responsible for her choice except herself." He approached Caleb again. "Mr. Hale, is there anything else you would like to say to this court?" Caleb opened his eyes and looked directly at Henry, who sat rigid in his seat, his face a mask of barely controlled emotion. "I loved your sister," Caleb said quietly. "I loved her from the first moment I saw her, and I love her still. Not a day goes by that I don't wish I could have saved her. Not a day goes by that I don't wonder if there was something more I could have done, something I missed, some way I failed her." His voice broke. "But I didn't hurt her, Henry. I didn't cause her death. The only thing I'm guilty of is being unable to cure an illness that no one fully understands. And if that's a crime, then I suspect we're all guilty of it when we lose someone we love." The courtroom was utterly silent. Elena saw tears streaming down the faces of several spectators. She saw Mrs. Patterson press a handkerchief to her mouth. She saw the magistrate remove his spectacles and wipe his eyes. And she saw Henry. The broken man in the front row seemed to crumble as Caleb spoke, the rigid mask of anger dissolving into something rawer and more honest. When Caleb finished, Henry rose unsteadily to his feet. "I withdraw the petition," his lawyer tried to intervene. "Mr. Crawford, you can't simply—" "I withdraw the petition." Henry's voice was louder now, carrying across the silent room. "I was wrong. I've been wrong for 2 years, and I've been too consumed by my own grief to see it." He looked at Caleb with eyes that were finally terribly clear. "You didn't kill my sister. Her illness killed her, and I've spent all this time looking for someone to blame because I couldn't accept that there was no one to blame. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." The magistrate cleared his throat. "Given the withdrawal of the petition and the compelling testimony presented here today, this court finds no basis for further investigation into the death of Sarah Hale. The matter is dismissed." The sound that rippled through the courtroom was almost physical, a collective release of held breath, a murmur of voices that rose and then faded into something gentler. Elena felt tears on her own cheeks, felt Maggie's hand still gripping hers, felt the weight of the past 2 years finally beginning to lift. Caleb descended from the witness stand and crossed the room, not toward Elena and Maggie, but toward Henry. The two men stood facing each other for a long moment, brothers-in-law, bound by grief and love, and a woman they had both lost. Then Caleb extended his hand. Henry looked at it for several seconds, his expression cycling through surprise and shame and something that might have been hope. Then he reached out and clasped Caleb's hand in both of his own. "She loved you," Henry said, his voice rough. "Whatever I said, whatever accusations I made, she loved you. She told me once that you were the best thing that ever happened to her." "She was the best thing that ever happened to me," Caleb replied. "Until Maggie. And now—" He turned to look at Elena and his daughter standing together at the back of the room. "Now I've been given another chance. I don't intend to waste it." They walked out of the courthouse into afternoon sunshine that felt like benediction. Maggie ran ahead, her relief expressing itself in motion, in the simple joy of being released from tension she had absorbed but couldn't fully understand. Elena walked beside Caleb, their shoulders brushing with each step. "It's over," she said quietly. "It's really over." "No." Caleb took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "It's not over. It's just beginning." The ride home felt different than the anxious journey that morning. The landscape that passed them looked brighter somehow, as if the inquiry's resolution had lifted a veil from the world itself. Maggie fell asleep against Elena's shoulder, exhausted by the emotional weight of the day, and the two adults rode in comfortable silence. When they reached the ranch, Caleb lifted his sleeping daughter from the wagon and carried her inside, tucking her into bed with the gentle efficiency of long practice. Elena waited on the porch, watching the sun sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed too beautiful to be real. She heard the door open and close behind her, felt Caleb's presence before he spoke. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for standing by me through all of this, for believing in me when believing must have been difficult." "It was never difficult." Elena turned to face him. "I know who you are, Caleb. I've known since that first night when you offered shelter to a stranger because it was the right thing to do. Whatever stories other people might tell about you, I know the truth. And the truth is that you're a good man who did everything he could to save someone he loved, and who never stopped fighting for his family even when the world seemed determined to tear it apart." Caleb was quiet for a moment, his gray eyes searching her face. Then he reached into his pocket and withdrew something small, a ring, Elena realized. Simple gold catching the last light of day. "This was my mother's," he said. "She gave it to me before she died, told me to save it for someone worthy. I gave it to Sarah on our wedding day, and after she was gone, I put it away. I thought I would never have cause to take it out again." Elena felt her heart stop, restart, begin to race. "Caleb, I know we said we weren't going to rush into anything. I know we agreed to take things slowly, to let whatever this is between us grow at its own pace. But today, in that courtroom, when I was telling the whole world about the worst day of my life, All I could think about was you, about how you've changed everything, about how the house feels like home again because you're in it, about how Maggie laughs more and I breathe easier and the future seems like something to look forward to instead of something to survive. He took her hand and pressed the ring into her palm. I'm not asking you to answer right now. I'm just asking you to keep this, to think about what it might mean if you decided to wear it. His voice was rough with emotion. I know I'm not what you expected when you came west. I know I'm not the future you imagined. But I love you, Elena Cruz. I love you more than I knew I was still capable of loving anyone. And if you'll have me, if you'll have us, I promise to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing us. Elena looked at the ring in her palm, this small circle of gold that represented so much history, so much loss, so much hope. She thought of the woman who had worn it before her, of the love that had bound Caleb and Sarah together, of the illness that had torn them apart. She thought of Maggie sleeping inside, this fierce child who had claimed her heart without permission. She thought of all the moments that had led her here, the letters she had written, the train she had boarded, the rejection she had survived, the family she had found in the aftermath of devastation. Yes, she said. Caleb's breath caught. Yes? Yes, I'll think about it. Yes, I'll keep the ring. She smiled, feeling tears on her cheeks for what seemed like the 100th time that day. And yes, Caleb. Yes to all of it. Yes to you. Yes to Maggie. Yes to this life I never knew I wanted until I found it. When he kissed her this time, it tasted like endings and beginnings all at once, like the closing of one chapter and the opening of another, like the promise of a future built not on contracts or arrangements, but on something far more precious and rare. Love. Real love. The kind that grew from shared struggle and quiet moments, and the simple act of choosing someone, day after day after day. Behind them, the door creaked open. Are you kissing again? They broke apart to find Maggie standing in the doorway, her hair mussed from sleep and her eyes bright with curiosity. I thought you were asleep, Caleb said. I was. But then I heard voices, and I wanted to make sure everything was okay. She looked between them, her gaze settling on the ring that Elena was now slipping onto her finger. Is that Grandma's ring? The one you showed me once and said was for someone special? Yes, sweetheart, it is. Maggie's face broke into a smile so wide it seemed to illuminate the gathering dusk. Does that mean Elena's going to be my new mother? Elena knelt down to meet the child's eyes. Would that be all right with you? All right. Maggie threw her arms around Elena's neck. It's what I wished for, every night since you came. It's what I've been wishing for all along. Elena held this child, her child now, in every way that mattered, and felt the last walls around her heart crumble into dust. She had come west seeking a husband and found something far more precious. A daughter. A partner. A home built not on the foundation of desperate necessity, but on the bedrock of love freely given and gratefully received. The three of them stood together on the porch as the sun completed its descent behind the mountains, painting the sky in colors that had no names. A family forged in the crucible of loss and renewal, bound together by choice rather than obligation, facing a future that was uncertain but no longer frightening. Tomorrow there would be plans to make, a wedding to arrange, a life to build, a world to face together. But tonight, there was just this moment, this porch, these two people who had somehow become her everything. Elena Cruz had traveled 2,000 miles to become a bride. She had found something far better. She had found her way home. The weeks following the inquiry passed in a blur of preparations that transformed the quiet ranch into something approaching chaos. Word of Caleb's exoneration had spread through the territory like wildfire, and with it came a shift in how the community regarded the Hale family. Neighbors who had kept their distance for 2 years suddenly found reasons to visit, bringing casseroles and well wishes and offers of help with the wedding that was now the talk of Elk Creek. Elena found herself overwhelmed by the attention. She had spent so long thinking of herself as an outsider, first in Philadelphia, where her heritage had marked her as different, and then in Montana, where her circumstances had made her an object of curiosity and speculation. Now she was being welcomed into a community that had once whispered about her, and she wasn't entirely sure how to receive such welcome. "They mean well," Caleb told her one evening, after a particularly exhausting day of visitors. "Most of them, anyway. They're just not very good at showing it." "Mrs. Patterson told me she always knew I was a good influence on this family," Elena said dryly. "Apparently she's been telling everyone in town how she predicted our engagement from the very beginning." "That sounds like Mrs. Patterson. She has a remarkable ability to remember the future." Despite her exhaustion, Elena laughed. It was something she did more freely now, laughing, smiling, allowing herself to feel joy without immediately bracing for its loss. The weight she had carried since Marcus Webb's rejection had finally lifted, replaced by something lighter and more precious. The wedding was set for the first Saturday in June, when the wildflowers would be blooming across the mountain meadows, and the weather would be warm enough for an outdoor ceremony. It would be simple, they had decided, just family and close neighbors, gathered in the field behind the ranch house where Sarah had once planted a garden that still bloomed each spring. "Are you sure?" Elena had asked when Caleb suggested the location. "I know that place holds memories for you." "It does. Good memories, mostly." Sarah loved that garden. She would spend hours there, even on her darkest days, just sitting among the flowers and watching the bees. He had taken Elena's hand then, his gray eyes soft with something that wasn't quite sadness. "I think she would want it to be used for happy things again. I think she would want Maggie to see that life goes on, that the places where we've grieved can also be places where we celebrate." Elena had agreed, moved by his willingness to weave the past into their future rather than pretending it didn't exist. Sarah would always be part of this family, not as a ghost to be feared or a memory to be buried, but as a mother loved and lost, whose legacy lived on in her daughter and in the man who had never stopped honoring her. The days grew longer and warmer, and the ranch came alive with the activity of spring. Caleb spent long hours in the fields, making up for the work that had been neglected during the inquiry. Elena divided her time between wedding preparations and her usual responsibilities, finding satisfaction in the familiar rhythms of cooking and cleaning and teaching Maggie lessons that grew more advanced each week. It was during one of these lessons, on a morning bright with sunshine and birdsong, that Maggie asked the question Elena had been waiting for. "When you marry Pa, will I call you Mama?" Elena set down the book they had been reading and gave the question the serious consideration it deserved. "That depends on what feels right to you. I would be honored if you wanted to call me Mama, but I don't want you to feel like you have to. Your mother was your first mama, and nothing will ever change that." "I know." Maggie's expression was thoughtful, her blue eyes, so like Sarah's, according to everyone who had known her, fixed on something Elena couldn't see. "But she's been gone a long time, and you've been here for months and months. You teach me things and take care of me and help Pa not be so sad all the time." "Those things are true. But being here doesn't automatically make me your mother. Being a mother is something different, something deeper." "What makes it deeper?" Elena thought about her own mother, dead now for nearly 20 years but still vivid in her memory. She thought about the lessons she had learned and the love she had received and the way that love had shaped her into the person she had become. "Love makes it deeper," she said finally. "Not just the love of taking care of someone, but the love of wanting what's best for them even when it's hard. The love of being proud of them when they succeed and comforting them when they fail. The love of knowing that no matter what happens, you will always, always be there for them." Maggie considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important questions. "Do you love me that way?" "Yes." The word came out without hesitation. "I do." "Then I think I'll call you Mama." Maggie nodded, as if confirming a decision she had already made. "Not because I've forgotten my first mama, but because my heart is big enough for two. Is that okay?" Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. Happy tears, the kind she had learned to welcome rather than fight. "That's more than okay. That's perfect." Maggie grinned and threw her arms around Elena's neck in the exuberant embrace that had become familiar over the past months. "I'm glad you came to the train station that day. I'm glad that mean man didn't want to marry you. I'm glad Pa found you. I'm glad about all those things too, sweetheart." "Even the mean man part?" Elena thought about Marcus Webb, about the rejection that had seemed so devastating at the time, about the contract dispute that had threatened their peace, about all the ways he had tried to control and diminish her. She thought about how she had felt sitting on that bench at the train station, convinced that her life was over. Even that part, she said, because without it, I never would have found my way here. And here is exactly where I'm supposed to be. The wedding dress arrived from the territory's capital 2 weeks before the ceremony, ordered from a seamstress who specialized in frontier brides. It was simpler than the dress Elena had packed in her suitcase all those months ago, the one she had bought for Marcus Webb, now quietly donated to a charity for women in need. But it was beautiful in its simplicity. Cream-colored cotton with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs, fitted through the bodice and flowing into a full skirt that would move gracefully in the mountain breeze. Elena tried it on in her room, turning before the small mirror to see how the fabric caught the light. She barely recognized herself. The woman staring back at her looked confident, settled, at peace in a way that the anxious bride-to-be of 8 months ago never had been. A knock at the door interrupted her reverie. "Elena, can I come in?" It was Maggie, her voice carrying the particular urgency of a child with something important to share. "Just a moment." Elena carefully hung the dress back in the wardrobe before opening the door. "What is it, sweetheart?" "Mrs. Patterson is here. She brought something for you. She says it's important." Elena descended the stairs to find the older woman standing in the kitchen, clutching a cloth-wrapped package against her chest. She looked uncomfortable in a way that was unusual for someone who normally carried herself with such certainty. "Miss Cruz, or I suppose I should start calling you Mrs. Hale, shouldn't I, in anticipation." "Elena is fine, Mrs. Patterson. What can I do for you?" "It's more what I can do for you." The older woman thrust the package toward Elena with a briskness that seemed designed to mask emotion. "This belonged to Sarah. She left it with me before. She asked me to keep it safe and to give it to the next woman who became Caleb's wife. She said that if he ever found love again, she wanted that woman to have her blessing." Elena took the package with trembling hands. The cloth was old but clean, wrapped carefully around something small and soft. When she unwrapped it, she found a handkerchief embroidered with delicate flowers, and beneath it, a folded piece of paper. "I never read the letter," Mrs. Patterson said quickly. "It wasn't addressed to me." But Sarah was very specific about her instructions. She said the right time would be when someone came along who truly loved Caleb and Maggie, who would care for them not out of obligation or convenience, but out of genuine devotion. She paused. "I've watched you these past months, Miss Cruz. I've seen how you look at that child, how you look at him. Whatever doubts I might have had when you first arrived, they're gone now." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. This means more than I can say." The older woman nodded briskly, clearly uncomfortable with prolonged emotion. "Well, I'll leave you to it. Things to do. You know how it is." After she left, Elena sat down at the kitchen table and unfolded the letter with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The handwriting was unfamiliar, neat and precise, showing no signs of the illness that had eventually claimed its author. The words, though, were intimate in a way that made Elena feel as though she were intruding on something sacred. "To the woman who comes after me," the letter began. "If you're reading this, then Caleb has found love again. I want you to know that this is what I wanted for him. Not the grief, not the loneliness, not the guilt that I know he carries, even though none of this is his fault. I wanted him to be happy, and if he has chosen you, then I trust that you are someone who can give him that happiness. Please take care of my Maggie. She is the best thing I ever did with my life, and leaving her is the hardest part of all of this. I know Caleb will raise her well, but she needs a mother too. Not someone to replace me. I hope she will always remember me, even if those memories are faded and incomplete. But someone to do the things I won't be there to do. Braid her hair and teach her to cook, and tell her about being a woman in this world. I have been sick for a long time. Sick in a way that doctors don't have names for, and that medicine can't cure. There is a darkness in me that has grown too large to contain, and I have decided that it is better to end things on my own terms than to let the darkness consume everything I love. This is not Caleb's fault. Please make sure he knows that. Make sure Maggie knows it too. I am choosing this because I'm tired in a way that sleep cannot fix, and because I would rather leave them with memories of who I was then watch them suffer through who I am becoming. Love them for me. Love them the way I wish I could have loved them, if I had been stronger. And know that wherever I am now, I am grateful to you for taking care of the family I had to leave behind. With hope for a future I will never see, Sarah. Elena sat motionless for a long time after finishing the letter, tears streaming down her face unchecked. This woman, this brave, broken woman, had known what was coming, had prepared for it in the only way she could, had left behind not just instructions, but permission, absolution, a passing of the torch from one mother to another. When Caleb came in from the fields that evening, he found Elena still sitting at the table, the letter spread before her. He read it in silence, his expression cycling through surprise, grief, and finally something that looked like peace. She wanted this, he said quietly. She wanted me to find you, or someone like you. She wanted you to be happy. I wasn't sure I could be, not like this, not again. He sat down beside her and took her hand. But she knew me better than I knew myself. She knew that I was capable of more love than I believed. She trusted me to find my way back to joy. Do you feel guilty that we're happy while she's gone? Sometimes, less now than before. He looked at the letter again, at the handwriting of the woman he had loved first. But reading this, it helps. It feels like permission, like she's telling me it's okay to move forward. She loved you very much. I know. And I loved her. But love isn't finite, Elena. It doesn't run out because you give some of it away. I can love her memory and love you at the same time. I can honor what we had and celebrate what we're building. She understood that. Maybe better than I did. Elena leaned against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart. I'll keep my promise to her. I'll take care of Maggie. I'll take care of you. And I'll make sure neither of you ever forgets how much she loved you. I know you will. That's why I asked you to marry me. They sat together in the fading light, two people bound by loss and found by love, holding the words of a woman who had left them behind but never stopped caring. And Elena felt for the first time that she understood the full shape of what she was entering into. Not a replacement for what had been, but a continuation. A new chapter in a story that had begun before her and would extend beyond her. That night, she tucked Maggie into bed and told her about the letter. Not all of it. Some parts were too heavy for a child to carry, but enough. Enough for Maggie to know that her mother had thought about the future, had wanted good things for the family she was leaving, had loved her daughter with the last coherent thought she possessed. Maggie listened with the gravity of someone much older than her years. When Elena finished, the child was quiet for a long moment. Mama loved me, she said finally. Both my mamas loved me. Yes, sweetheart. Both your mamas love you very much. I'm lucky, aren't I? Some children don't even have one mama who loves them. I have two. Elena kissed her forehead, overwhelmed by the simple wisdom of this child who had learned to find abundance in the midst of loss. You are the luckiest girl I know, Maggie Hale, and I am the luckiest woman alive to have found you and your father. We're all lucky, Maggie declared. We found each other. That's what matters. The morning of the wedding dawned clear and bright, with the kind of blue sky that seemed to promise good fortune. Elena woke early, too nervous to sleep, and stood at her window watching the sun rise over mountains that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. In a few hours, she would become Elena Hale. She would stand in a field of wildflowers and promise herself to a man who had shown her what real partnership looked like. She would become, officially and permanently, Maggie's mother. She would take her place in a family that had been broken and was now being remade. The thought terrified her. It also filled her with a joy so profound she could barely contain it. Mrs. Patterson arrived early to help with preparations, bringing with her a small army of neighbor women who descended on the ranch house with flowers and food and an efficiency that bordered on military precision. Elena was swept up in a tide of activity that left no room for nervousness. Her hair was styled, her dress adjusted, her face dabbed with the barest hint of color from Mrs. Patterson's personal collection of cosmetics. You look beautiful, Mrs. Patterson declared when the transformation was complete. Just beautiful. Caleb is a lucky man. I'm the lucky one. Nonsense, you're both lucky. That's how good marriages work. Both people feel like they got the better end of the deal. The older woman's expression softened unexpectedly. I was too hard on you when you first arrived. I judged you by circumstances rather than character. That was wrong of me, and I apologize. There's nothing to apologize for. You were looking out for this family. I was, but I should have seen sooner that you were exactly what they needed. Mrs. Patterson straightened the lace at Elena's collar with maternal fussiness. Sarah would have liked you, I think. You're different from her, but you have the same kind of strength, the same capacity for love. The words stayed with Elena as she made her way out to the field behind the house, where the guests had gathered in a rough semicircle around the spot Caleb had chosen for the ceremony. She could see him standing there, dressed in his best clothes with his hair combed back, and his expression caught somewhere between nervousness and joy. And beside him stood Maggie, her wheat blonde hair braided with wildflowers, her blue eyes shining with the particular excitement of a child who had gotten exactly what she wished for. Elena walked toward them without music, without formal procession, without any of the traditional trappings of an Eastern wedding. There was only the rustle of her dress in the mountain breeze and the crunch of her shoes on grass still wet with morning dew. There was only the smell of wildflowers and the warmth of June sunshine, and the faces of people who had become her community, her neighbors, her friends. There was only this moment, approaching with each step, becoming more real with each heartbeat. Caleb's eyes never left her face as she walked. She could see the emotion there, the love, the hope, the gratitude. She could see him seeing her, not as the desperate woman who had arrived at the train station 8 months ago, but as the partner she had become, the mother, the wife. When she reached him, he took her hands without prompting, and the minister began the simple ceremony they had agreed upon. The words washed over Elena like water, traditional phrases about love and commitment and the joining of two lives into one. She heard them, but she wasn't really listening. She was too busy looking at the man before her, at the child beside him, at the life that was unfolding before her like a flower opening to the sun. Do you, Elena Maria Cruz, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband? To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do you part? I do. The words came out clear and strong, carrying across the field to where Sarah's garden still bloomed, where her memory lived on in flowers that returned each spring. And do you, Caleb William Hale, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife? To have and to hold from this day forward, for better or for worse, for richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do you part? I do. His voice was rough with emotion, but his eyes never wavered from hers. Then by the power vested in me by this territory, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise, a public declaration of what they had been building in private for months. When they pulled apart, the gathered crowd erupted in cheers and applause, and Elena felt Maggie's small body collide with her legs in an embrace that nearly knocked her over. "We're a family now," Maggie shouted, loud enough for everyone to hear. "We're officially, really, truly a family." Elena knelt down to gather the child in her arms, and Caleb's arms came around both of them. And for one perfect moment, they stood there in a tangle of joy and love and belonging. The broken pieces had come together at last. The story had found its way to a happy ending. No, Elena corrected herself, not an ending, a beginning. The celebration that followed was everything a frontier wedding should be. Food and music and dancing that lasted until the stars came out. Elena found herself passed from neighbor to neighbor, receiving congratulations and well wishes from people who had once been strangers and were now part of her world. Henry had come, to her surprise. He stood at the edge of the gathering, looking uncertain but determined, until Elena approached him herself. "Thank you for being here. I wasn't sure I should come. After everything that happened, you withdrew the petition, you apologized, you told the truth." Elena smiled at him. That took courage. Sarah would have been proud. Henry's eyes glistened. "You think so?" "I know so. She loved you. She would have wanted you to find peace." "I'm trying. It's hard, but I'm trying." He glanced toward where Caleb and Maggie were dancing together, the child standing on her father's feet as he moved them both in clumsy circles. He looks happy, really happy. He is. Then I'm glad, for all of you. Henry extended his hand formally. Welcome to the family, Mrs. Hale. Elena shook it. Thank you, Henry. I hope we'll see more of you. I'd like that. I've missed Maggie, missed having a family. Then visit. You're always welcome here. As the evening wore on, Elena found moments to slip away from the celebration and simply observe. She watched Caleb laughing with the neighbors who had once whispered about him. She watched Maggie charming the adults with her endless stream of observations and questions. She watched this family, her family, surrounded by community, no longer isolated by grief and suspicion. This was what she had traveled 2,000 miles to find. Not a contract arrangement or a business partnership, but this. Connection. Belonging. Love. Later, after the guests had gone home and Maggie had been tucked into bed, Elena and Caleb sat together on the porch, watching the moon rise over the mountains. She leaned against his shoulder, feeling the warmth of him through the fabric of her dress. Are you happy, Mrs. Hale? She smiled at the name. Yes. Happier than I knew I could be. Good, because I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you stay that way. That's a big promise. I know, but I've learned something these past months. He turned to look at her, his gray eyes silver in the moonlight. Promises aren't about being certain. They're about being committed. I can't promise that nothing bad will ever happen, or that I'll never make mistakes, or that life will be easy, but I can promise to choose you every day, no matter what. I can promise to face whatever comes together, as partners, as a family. Elena felt tears threaten again, happy tears, the kind that seemed to come so easily now. That's the best kind of promise. It's the only kind worth making. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the chirp of crickets, the soft whisper of wind through the pines. Elena thought about all the nights to come, stretching out before them like the Montana sky. All the ordinary days of work and laughter and challenge, all the moments of joy and sorrow, and everything in between. She thought about the train station bench where she had sat in despair, convinced her life was over. She thought about the child who had wandered over with innocent curiosity and changed everything. She thought about the man who had offered her shelter without expecting anything in return, and how that offer had grown into something neither of them could have predicted. Life was strange, she reflected. It took you in directions you never planned, broke you in ways you never expected, and sometimes, if you were brave enough to keep going, it gave you gifts that exceeded your wildest dreams. Caleb? Thank you. For what? For taking a chance on me. For seeing something worth keeping when everyone else saw someone to discard. For giving me a home when I had nowhere to go. He pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. You gave me just as much, maybe more. You brought light back into this house. You brought laughter back to my daughter. You brought hope back to me. His voice was rough with emotion. I thought my story was over, Elena. I thought the best years of my life were behind me. You showed me I was wrong. We showed each other. Yes, we did. Inside the house, Elena heard a small sound, footsteps on the stairs, the creak of floorboards. A moment later, the door opened and Maggie appeared, rubbing her eyes. I couldn't sleep. There's too much happiness in me. It won't settle down. Caleb laughed and lifted her into his lap. Too much happiness is a good problem to have. I know, but it's still a problem. She snuggled against his chest, then reached out to take Elena's hand. Can we stay like this, all three of us, just for a little while? For as long as you want, sweetheart. They sat together under the stars, the three of them, wrapped in the quiet warmth of belonging. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. A ranch to run, a child to raise, a marriage to nurture. Tomorrow would bring the ordinary work of building a life from the raw materials of love and commitment. But tonight, there was only this moment, this family, this home. Elena looked up at the sky, at the same stars she had seen from her window in Philadelphia, but that seemed somehow brighter here, and she made a silent promise, not to Caleb or Maggie, but to herself. She promised to remember this feeling, this perfect, precious contentment, no matter what the future brought. She promised to hold on to it when times got hard, to draw strength from it when she felt weak, to let it guide her through whatever challenges lay ahead. She had spent so much of her life searching for a place where she belonged, and now, finally, impossibly, she had found it. 8 months ago, Elena Cruz had boarded a train with a suitcase full of hope and a heart full of dreams. She had traveled 2,000 miles to marry a stranger, only to be rejected before the journey even began. She had sat on a bench in a frontier train station, watching her future collapse, believing that nothing good could possibly come from such devastating loss. She had been wrong. Because out of that loss had come Maggie, with her sky-blue eyes and her fearless heart. Out of that loss had come Caleb, with his quiet strength and his capacity for love that had survived the worst kind of grief. Out of that loss had come a home, a family, a life that she had never imagined but couldn't imagine living without. Marcus Webb had looked at her and seen someone not worth keeping. The Hales had looked at her and seen someone worth loving. That, Elena thought, made all the difference in the world. The moon climbed higher in the sky. Maggie's breathing deepened into sleep, her small body heavy with contentment against her father's chest. The night wrapped around them like a blessing, peaceful and complete. Elena closed her eyes and let herself rest in this moment, this life, this love that had found her when she least expected it. She was home. She was, at long last, exactly where she was meant to be. And as the stars wheeled slowly overhead and the night deepened toward dawn, Elena Hale smiled in her sleep, dreaming of all the ordinary, extraordinary days to come. The family they had chosen, the love they had built, the home they had made, together, out of nothing but courage and kindness, and the simple, stubborn belief that broken things could be mended, that lost things could be found, that rejected brides could become beloved wives, and lonely children could become cherished daughters, and empty houses could become homes full of laughter and light. That was the real ending to their story. Not an ending at all, really, just the beginning of everything that mattered.